Chapter 279. Yang Family Academy. Yang Qindong had just taught everyone a physics lesson as a teacher. In this lesson, Yang Qindong vividly illustrated the importance of physics and explained some things that no one could understand before. He focused on the topic of gravity. This lesson could be said to have opened everyone's eyes. From Yang Qindong's explanation, everyone finally understood that not only did people do things according to a pattern, but everything in the world was the same. It was just that they were not good at discovering it before. Under the admiring gazes of dozens of students, Yang Qindong walked out of the classroom. Outside, Tiger's mane had been waiting anxiously for a long time. First, Yang Qindong took the handkerchief and wiped off the chalk foam one by one. Then, he asked calmly, "What's wrong? What's the conclusion of the imperial court? Or did the unit come to my Yang family manor?" From these words, it could be seen that Yang Qindong had predicted the development of the matter, and it was quite accurate. In response to the young master's question, the conclusion has been reached. More than 70% of the imperial censors participated in the impeachment of the young master. In the entire imperial court, except for Minister Hu, Minister Wang, and a few others, the rest of the people criticized the young master. In the end, the acting emperor ordered the young master to publicly apologize in order to obtain the forgiveness of the Japanese ambassador. Tiger's mane carefully told Yang Qindong the news he had just received. After he finished, he looked nervously at the young master and prepared for him to be angry. To Tiger's mane's disappointment, Yang Qindong did not seem to be very agitated. On the contrary, his expression was incomparably calm, as if he had already expected the result. After listening to Tiger's mane's retelling of everything, he sighed. "Sigh, is this the so-called tolerance?" The tolerance that Yang Qindong spoke of was naturally not referring to the attitude of the Daizong emperor and the courtiers towards him. Although he hadn't done many things, which one of them wasn't earth-shattering? By offering potatoes, he solved the problem of food and clothing for the common people, making it rare for people to starve to death due to lack of food. He saved Yingzong and saved the face of the great Ming dynasty. He defended the capital, defeated the Walla, and maintained the stability of the capital and even the entire great Ming dynasty, giving it time to continue developing. But when all of this was over, what did he get in return? Jealousy, dissatisfaction, and resentment all emerged from his bones. How could this be the tolerance that should be given to a meritorious minister? To his own people, he would step on them whenever he could. On the contrary, to outsiders, he would show a tolerant and magnanimous side. The Japanese envoy, Kimura Yoshida, only said that if the relationship between the two countries deteriorated, Japan would invade the border by sea. Just this simple sentence, without any actual action. Is the great Ming dynasty going to ask their great hero to admit his mistake? How chilling would this be? Don't they know that doing this will only hurt their loved ones and make their enemies happy? Don't they know that doing this will only make the common people lose confidence in the great Ming dynasty? Don't they know that the consequences of doing this will lead to a major event, and no one will dare to stand up and fight for the great Ming dynasty? Don't they know? At this moment, Yang Qindong's heart was as uncomfortable as a river and a sea. He understood the history of the later generations and knew that when the Han people were strong, they were always willing to show their magnanimous side, but often when they were weak, it was time for them to pay a heavy price. This price caused some dynasties to change, some caused the common people to be displaced, some caused the civilization to be seriously damaged, and some caused many Chinese treasures to fall into the arms of the motherland, forever unable to return to the embrace of the motherland. And all of these developments formed history, which was also a history of blood and tears. People said that if one looked at history as a mirror, one could know the rise and fall, and if one looked at people as a mirror, one could see the gains and losses. It was precisely because he understood too much about these things that Yang Qindong decided to change everything, and the idea of the great Ming dynasty occupied an extremely important position. Only after understanding history did he know what kind of people could not be forgiven and forgiven. Japan was the most typical example. This small and weak race originated from the end of the Qing dynasty, and it could even be said that they were of the same origin as the Han people. This caused many of their habits and even their language to be similar. However, perhaps because of their geographical location, they felt a sense of urgency and nervousness from the moment they were born. It was this kind of pressure that allowed them to exert strength that was several times greater than their own. This was also a side branch of the Han people. Whenever the Han people were weak, they would send troops and take advantage of them before leaving. On the other hand, when the Han people were strong, they would wag their tails and beg for mercy, showing their weak and pitiful side. This method was repeated over and over again, and it worked every time. However, it was able to make the Han people tolerate it time and time again, causing them to be in a situation where it was too late to regret it. It was precisely because he understood too much that Yang Qindong had a different feeling. Facing a side branch of the Han people that could turn hostile and bite you at any time, the best way to deal with it was not to be magnanimous and tolerate it, nor was it to be magnanimous and change it. Instead, it was to replace it, assimilate it, and devour it. Only then would it be over. In other words, the so-called tolerance would not work on the Japanese. On the contrary, they should directly devour them, and then change them from the bottom of their hearts, until they faced their own bloodline and origin, and let them know that they were also part of the Han people. Only then could it be considered a complete solution. Of course, anyone could have such thoughts, but more importantly, whether or not they could do it was the most important. However, Yang Qindong, who possessed the Okura, already had the ability to do so. With the advanced weapons in the Okura, in the world at that time, there was no country, race, or individual that could resist technology that was hundreds of years more advanced than theirs. Since the conditions in terms of hardware had been met, the next step was to create an opportunity and decisively make a move. Inform Commander Gao Xiong with the fastest speed possible, and quickly get into position and carry out the original plan. Yang Qindong, who had made a decision in his heart, decisively made a decision. Then, he looked in the direction of the capital and said, blindly tolerating is not the best way to deal with some people, there should be no kindness in the first place. It's a pity that ignorant people like you can't understand this. Since that's the case, then let me teach you a lesson. An expert in civil war, an amateur in foreign war. This was a bad habit in many dynasties. Just like Dong Chunhua and the others. When the Walla army approached the capital, they were helpless. Not only that, they were thinking about how to escape and how to leave safely. However, when facing the great hero who defeated the Walla, they were very smart and used many methods to frame him. It was as if they had suddenly become a different person, very smart, and used many methods. Under the planning of Dong Chunhua, Yi Ming, and the other ministers of the 4 departments, the Japanese envoy Kimura Yoshida first appeared on the busiest street in the capital. He told everyone about the friendship between Japan and the Great Ming, and said that this friendship could have lasted for tens of thousands of years. However, it was precisely because of the rashness of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage that this friendship had been destroyed. And the consequence was very likely to cause a war between the two countries, which would affect the lives of the people. Not only would the quality of life decline, but many people would also die. This was an important matter that concerned the ordinary people. At the same time, another saying spread through the streets and alleys of the capital. That was the young Dong Shuai, the young war god, the young Duke of Loyalty and Courage had become arrogant. He did not care about the peaceful life of the people at all and advocated to send troops to Japan. This kind of disregard for the feelings of a friendly country and the life and death of the people was just to show his talent in leading troops to war. This kind of behavior that only cared about himself and did not care about others quickly attracted the disgust of many people who did not know the truth. Yang Qindong, who was originally very popular among the people, suffered a big blow in his image. At this time, there were even business groups that added insult to injury. They suddenly increased the price of their goods, but to outsiders, it was all because of Yang Qindong's proposal to pay the taxes. The taxes were heavy, and for their own interests, the merchants could only raise the price of their goods. In the end, the people who paid for all of this were the ordinary people. All kinds of things sprung up like bamboo shoots after a rain, causing the hearts of some people who originally supported Yang Qindong to be greatly shaken. Some people who did not know the truth and did not know the truth directly removed the longevity tablets of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage from their homes. Some people even burned the tablets to vent their hatred. These were the ordinary people. In the era when information was not developed, they were easily swayed by all kinds of false information and public opinion. Perhaps it was the kindness in their bones that made it easier for them to be deceived by others. It was precisely because they had kindness in their hearts that they thought others would be as kind as they were, that they would not think of others as evil, and that made it easier for others to take advantage of them. The public opinion changed greatly. The direct result was that fewer people went to the Yang clan's bank to deposit money, and more people went to withdraw money. Fewer people went to the immortal abode to eat. It had originally been difficult to find a single seat, but now it was completely deserted. Fewer people went to the Heavens Beyond Trading Company to pick up their goods. There were a few merchants who wanted to take advantage of this situation to make a fortune, but they were often attacked not long after picking up their goods. The direct result was that their goods were stolen, and they suffered heavy losses. Once these things were reported to the authorities, they would not be known, and no one would bother to ask about them. The Security Bureau recorded everything that happened every day and sent it to Yang Qindong. In the study, the amount of information written on paper increased with each passing day, piling up high. It was worrisome. Chapter 280. Madame Snow and Madame Snow had also returned to the Yang clan manor because of the lack of activity in the immortal abode. This was also Yang Qindong's idea. Even though they were only losing money, he didn't dare guarantee that there wouldn't be people who would take the risk and suddenly attack his family. Teng Shan had led the 100 soldiers of 3rd Company to Walla to open up a trade route, and had yet to return. In the capital, Yang Qindong didn't have a lot of manpower at his disposal. He couldn't take care of everything, so shrinking his forces was inevitable. Young master, another 3 million taels of silver was withdrawn from the bank today. It's already been like this for 5 days. If this continues, I'm afraid that we won't have enough gold left in the treasury, Tiger's Mane said, his forehead drenched in sweat. Originally, the Yang clan bank had prepared 1 million taels of gold to protect the interests of its depositors. Based on the ratio of 1 to 10, it was enough to pay out 10 million taels of gold. If nothing major happened, it would be enough. But what no one expected was that the sudden situation would cause the depositors to withdraw large amounts of money. Of the 1 million taels of gold they had prepared, less than 100,000 taels remained. If someone withdrew another 1 million taels of silver tomorrow, they really might not be able to pay out the money. The bank still has 500,000 taels of gold in the cellar. You can use it first. Yang Qindong didn't appear as anxious as Tiger's Mane. He was still as calm as ever, giving off the feeling that everything was within his expectations. Yes, Tiger's Mane nodded, but then he said timidly, but, enough, there's no need to say anything more. I know what you mean, but you can relax. The crisis will be resolved in a few days. As the head of the family, Yang Qindong had a lot of data in his mind. For example, during this period of time, the Yang family's bank had deposited a total of 30 million taels of silver. Of which, he had loaned out nearly 10 million taels of silver to those merchants who were trustworthy. Of the remaining 20 million taels, 9 million had already been withdrawn. However, it had only been 5 days. If the situation continued to develop, if 30 million customers came to withdraw their money, the Yang family bank would face a crisis of bankruptcy. It was precisely because Tiger's Mane knew about this that he wanted to see if he could urge the merchants to repay their loans as soon as possible. In this way, with 10 million yuan as capital, plus the 5 million yuan in the Yang family manor, it should be enough to deal with the crisis of people withdrawing their money. Speaking of which, Tiger's Mane wasn't wrong. According to the information from the Security Bureau, there were many big businessmen involved in this broadcasting incident, including many businessmen who had taken loans from the Yang family bank. They borrowed money from the Yang family's bank on one hand and ran a bank run on the Yang family's bank on the other hand, all because they didn't want to return the money. Just think about it, if the bank was gone, would the loans still need to be returned? Because of this, there were still many businessmen coming to the Yang family's bank to talk about loans. However, in the current situation, as the manager, Yang Fu didn't dare to agree. Of course, he rejected them one by one. Because of this incident, many businessmen talked about the Yang family bank in public and said that it wasn't good. It gave people the feeling that the bank was already unable to make ends meet. After the actions of the businessmen were investigated by the Security Bureau, they reported it to the 6th young master. As the leader of the action team, Tiger's Mane, who was also the leader of the Langia Special Forces, even made a detailed battle plan. However, when the matter was reported to Yang Qindong, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There wasn't the slightest response. This was why Tiger's Mane said, but. However, he was still interrupted by Yang Qindong in time. Okay, let's move the gold away first to solve the problem. Tiger's Mane had followed Yang Qindong for many years and knew the temper of the young master. Once a decision was made, there was no room for discussion. He cupped his fist and left the study room. After Tiger's Mane left, Yang Qindong's gaze fell on a map hanging on the wall. It was the map of the Ming dynasty's maritime border, and the Tianjin Guard was highlighted with a red pen. It seemed to indicate that something was going to happen there. Dong Mansion. Deputy Censor of the left, Dong Chunhua, was leaning back in his chair with a smug look on his face. Standing in front of him was a butler in a long robe. At this moment, he was talking non-stop about what he had seen and heard. Master, at noon today, the Yang family manor transported 500,000 taels of gold and sent it to the Yang family bank in the city. After the housekeeper finished explaining the last matter, he stood respectfully, looking as if he wanted to listen to his teachings. Oh. Isn't that the same as taking out 5 million taels of silver? This loyal duke is really rich. Dong Chunhua's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a trace of a proud smile in his eyes as he continued, very good. The richer he is, the greater my profits will be. Let's get ready. Tomorrow morning, I will make a trip to Yang village. The 5 days of preparation made Yang Qindong lose a lot of reputation and wealth. It was time for him to make a move. Once this heavy hammer was smashed, once the loyal eunuch apologized and admitted his mistake, his reputation would be ruined. Once this matter was spread out, his reputation would plummet. At that time, there would definitely be many people who would kick him while he was down. At that time, the loyal eunuch would inevitably lose both his life and wealth. In order to reward himself, it would be natural for him to go one step further in his official career. Dong Chunhua was very excited and even a little excited. He had begun to look forward to a new day. He wanted to see Yang Qindong's appearance when he made a fool of himself. On the contrary, in the palace, eunuch Jining, who had been watching all this from behind the scenes, frowned slightly. He was unable to feel happy. It had been 5 days since the court assembly. Although it seemed that Dong Chunhua, who had given the emperor's orders, was advancing step by step and making the situation look good for him, for some reason, he did not feel happy at all. Why isn't he fighting back? What is he waiting for? Jining muttered to himself in his room. After dealing with Yang Qindong several times, he had already experienced the power of his opponent. He did not believe that it would be so easy to defeat the youngest duke. If that was the case, the emperor would not be so afraid. He would not be a mere incompetent official without taking any action. No. He must have a backup plan. At least until now, that mysterious power has not appeared. Pouring a mouthful of tea into his mouth, Jin Ying's expression became even more uneasy. He would not forget that Yang Qindong had reminded all the eunuchs not to call themselves eunuchs. In the end, that night, 14 eunuchs had been threatened to varying degrees. It was also after that incident that Jining no longer dared to underestimate Yang Qindong. Eunuch, what did you say? Are you going to attack? In the corner of the room stood the commander of the brocade guards, Lu Gui. Because Jin Ying's voice had been too soft, he had not heard it clearly. However, he knew that Jining had spoken and thought that it was an order. No. Don't attack first. Wait and see. Also, you must restrain your subordinates. Without my orders, they must not attack as they please. Qing shook his head. His intuition told him that young Qindong would not simply wait for death. Sometimes, not doing anything did not mean that he would not do anything. On the contrary, when someone like this retaliated, it would be a thunderous blow. Qing did not want to be the one struck by lightning. Young family manor. It was already late at night. A guest suddenly appeared before the eyes of the hidden sentries. Immediately, a few silenced Type 95 guns were aimed at the incoming shadow. When the shadow came closer and closer and was already within 60 meters of the sentries, a voice suddenly rang out from the darkness. Password? Huang, reply. The shadow was first shocked to the spot by the sudden shout, but then he replied in a familiar voice. River. The voice rang out again in the darkness. Then, it returned to silence. The person who had come knew today's password. He must be a spy from the Security Bureau. Immediately, the person was led into the outskirts of the Yang family manor. Then, Yang Si, who was in charge of the night watch, received him. Not long after, Yang Si's figure appeared in the inner manor. After a while, the light in Yang Qindong's study was lit. When Yang Qindong put on a coat and entered the study, Yang Si knelt on the ground and said, Young master, the Security Bureau has just sent news. The people they sent have already received Commander Tingshan's group. They have already completed their first trade with the Vala Empire. This time, they brought back a total of 3 million silvers. Many of the Vala Empire's merchants also came along with them. They also brought a lot of money with them, wanting to buy our goods from beyond heavens. Now, their group is only a day away from the capital. If there are no accidents, they will enter the city tomorrow afternoon when the city gates close. Oh. So fast. Hearing this news, Yang Qindong's face was very excited. According to the previous estimate, Tingshan and Bai Peng's group would need at least half a month to return. After all, the transportation at that time was not very developed. In addition, Great Ming and Walla were enemies. There were even some areas that did not have roads and needed to be reopened. Now that they had returned so quickly, it could be seen that Tingshan and the others had put in a lot of effort. Of course, the reason why they returned so quickly was because Tingshan was worried about the safety of the sixth young master. But no matter what, they had returned with a large amount of gold and silver and many customers. They had solved the crisis of the Yang family bank. This allowed Yang Qindong to do things with less worry. Very good, they came back at the right time. How about this, Yang Si, let the Security Bureau go into the city and inform Yang Fu. Tell him that we can agree to the loans of those merchants. However, we have to raise the interest by 3%. Didn't they want to see this young master fall and take advantage of it? Now, I want to let these people know that there is no such thing as a free lunch in this world. Yang Qindong's eyes shone as he spoke. Chapter 281. Previously, those merchants had sought out cousin Yang Fu in the name of a reasonable loan, saying that they were in urgent need of silver. As long as they could meet their demands, they could accept an appropriate increase in interest. They were clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. The Yang clan bank was in a crisis, so Yang Fu had naturally rejected these requests. This action had caused them to speak carelessly, greatly affecting the reputation of the Yang clan bank. Now that the new silver had come in, and a large number of Walla merchants had followed them, it could be seen that this was a large sum of money coming into the account. Thus, it would not be Yang Qindong's personality if he did not use this opportunity to strike back. These thoughts instantly formed in Yang Qindong's mind. Yang Si naturally did not react so quickly, but since the order was given by the sixth young master, he would naturally obey unconditionally. After agreeing, he quickly left the study to deliver the news. When he was the only one left in the study, Yang Qindong used the candlelight to look at the map hanging on the wall and stood there for a long time. Very few people in the capital knew that Qing Mountain and the Bai clan caravan had returned. Early in the morning, after Dong Chunhua had her breakfast, she sat in the carriage that had been prepared beforehand. Accompanied by a few of her attendants, she headed straight for the Yang village. Along the way, Dong Chunhua was naturally excited. This time, he was representing the emperor in reprimanding the Duke of Loyalty and then ordering him to admit his wrongs. This was an awe-inspiring matter. Moreover, after this matter was completed, he might even be promoted. No matter how he thought about it, he was extremely happy. This was the Duke of Loyalty. He had once saved Ingzong's life and helped Emperor Zong stabilize the country. He was not even 20 years old, but he had relied on his own efforts to obtain the title of Duke of Loyalty. He was also known as the God of War and the Commander of the East. How glorious was that? And now, he had to take the initiative to admit his mistake under his own reprimand. How satisfying was that? Presumably, after this matter would become a stepping stone for him to climb up the ranks. It would also become the most glorious thing in his life. Filled with excitement, the carriage left the capital and arrived at the Yang family manor. As soon as the carriage arrived, the attendant immediately shouted at Ling Feng, who was a few dozen meters away, "Quickly inform the Duke of Loyal Courage to come here. My lord has a verbal order from the emperor." Wait. Since the other party claimed to have the emperor's orders, Ling Feng didn't dare to be negligent. Although the others were still keeping a close eye on the newcomer, they still sent a soldier to the inner courtyard of the Yang clan manor. Yang Qindong didn't have any classes to teach this morning. At this time, he was watching the four ladies play mahjong. This was also something that he had invented. Once it appeared, many people accepted it. Over the past few days, the Immortal Abode's business had taken a hit. Madame Xue and Madame Xiang stayed in the manor and learned mahjong from Madame Huyen. The four of them were perfect for a game. Yang Qindong, on the other hand, had become a spectator. All he could do was occasionally stand in front of Madame Xue and Madame Xiang, who weren't playing too well, and point at them. Yang Qindong, who had just ordered Madame Xue to play a bad tile and fired a cannon at Huyen, received a beautiful eye roll from her. When he saw Tiger's mane appear outside the door, he immediately walked over. As soon as he saw the young master, Tiger's mane said, "Dong Chunhua is here." Yang Qindong wasn't surprised in the slightest. On the contrary, he seemed to be looking forward to it. He's finally willing to show himself. No one knew that early in the morning, the Bureau of Security had sent word that Gao Xiong had led 200 Ling Feng and 2,000 naval reinforcements to attack the Tianjin garrison last night. They had entered through the port that had stopped construction. They had suddenly appeared and caught the Ming army guard post off guard. They captured more than 3,000 people and seized countless military resources. The Bureau of Security had contacted them through a very important radio station, so they had received the news early in the morning. The Ming army, which could only be informed orally, would not receive the news until the next morning, even if they used an 800-mile express. This was the advantage of advanced technology. Sometimes, the earlier they got the news, the earlier they could prepare, and the higher their chances of winning would be. It was at this time that Dong Chunhua appeared. This person had grasped the timing very well. If it had been a day ago, Yang Qindong would not have been so confident. However, since the other party had only appeared after receiving the news, he had no choice but to properly entertain the other party. Very well, since the guest is here, let him in. Yang Qindong's face was full of sarcasm. By the way, the students should be doing exercises between classes now. Arrange to meet him there. Understood, young master. Tiger's mane's face was also full of excitement. This Dong Chunhua actually dared to recklessly go against the young master. Since that was the case, he would show him some power and let him meet with a nose full of dust. He would let him know who he could never afford to offend. There were less than 70 people left in the Yang Qindong Academy. Even with this number, it was still decreasing. But those who stayed were all gold. They all had something they were good at and were appreciated by Yang Qindong, which was why they had stayed until now. When Yang Qindong appeared, these people were doing exercises between classes. This was also Yang Qindong's request. They could study and train their bodies at the same time. He did not want bookworms. These students did not have to be better than those in the military, but they had to at least be healthy. Yang Qindong's appearance immediately attracted everyone's attention. Originally, there was no teacher's class, so they did not know why Dong Shuai would appear here. But they soon had an answer. An official wearing the Ming dynasty's third-rank official's uniform walked into the field under the guidance of Yang Si. The person's lips were slightly thin, and his body was slightly plump. His eyes were constantly moving, and he first glanced contemptuously at the nearly 70 academy students standing on the square. He even involuntarily let out a cold snort from his nose. Then, he stared at Yang Qindong without the slightest hint of respect in his expression. The person who came was Dong Chunhua. The reason why he looked at the academy with such a cold gaze was because once Yang Qindong fell, these students of the Yang Qindong Academy would be ostracized by everyone. Such a person would not be accepted by everyone. Such a person naturally had no future. Since he was a person with no future, why should he give him any face? When he looked at Yang Qindong, there was not the slightest respect in his expression. His attitude was very clear. He thought that this loyal duke would fall without a doubt. Facing such a person who was about to lose power, he did not even bother to show respect on the surface. Dong Chunhua's performance was very realistic. Yang Qindong also did not look at the other party. Even if the person came and was already standing there, he still treated him as invisible air and did not pay any attention to him. This made Dong Chunhua, who was standing there, embarrassed. He was a dignified third-rank official of the imperial court who was about to enter the second rank. Coming to a manor and being ignored was definitely a slap in the face. But he came uninvited, so he could not blame others. Cough. Helplessly, in order to show his existence, he had to cough heavily to attract everyone's attention. Sure enough, this cough made Yang Qindong gently turn his face, as if he had just noticed him. His face was full of surprise as he said, "Who are you? How did you appear in my Yang family academy?" Face to face, Yang Qindong did not recognize him. Dong Chunhua was angry in his heart. Thinking back to the time when Dong Shuai got married, he came with the officials to congratulate. At that time, everyone was chatting happily. How long had it been, and now he did not recognize him. Knowing that Yang Qindong deliberately did this, Dong Chunhua still had to introduce himself. "I am the left deputy imperial censor of the censorate, Dong Chunhua. I am here to speak on behalf of the emperor." After saying this arrogantly, Dong Chunhua looked up to the sky, waiting for Yang Qindong to say the three respectful words, "Follow the emperor's orders." But when he looked up to the sky, he did not get any response. When he turned his head back to look, he was so angry that smoke almost came out of his 7 orifices. He saw that Yang Qindong was focused on the students of the academy doing exercises. He did not have the slightest intention of replying. It was as if he was talking to the air just now. Loyal and courageous. What are you doing? In anger, Dong Chunhua could not help but scold loudly. N. After being shouted, Yang Qindong turned his head very casually. Immediately, an unstoppable murderous aura appeared in his eyes. When this murderous gaze landed on Dong Chunhua, it actually caused his entire body to involuntarily tremble and his legs to tremble. At this moment, he seemed to see a knife shining with cold light on his neck, as if it would fall and take his life at any time. In his previous life, Yang Qindong had broken through a mountain of corpses and a sea of fire. In this life, he had become Yang Qindong, so he had a good grasp of the murderous aura. Suddenly putting this murderous aura on Dong Chunhua, who was born as a scholar, the effect could be imagined. Looking at Dong Chunhua who was shivering all over, Yang Qindong said with displeasure in his voice, "What are you shouting here for? Don't lose the face of a scholar." He was actually reprimanded. Dong Chunhua was so angry that his teeth were chattering. He thought in his heart, how is this possible? How is this possible? It was said that no matter what rank an official was, when someone came to speak on behalf of the emperor, they should respectfully say the 3 words, obey the emperor's orders. Only in this way could they show respect for the emperor's power, which was the duty of an official. It was with this thought that Dong Chunhua came to Yang village with full confidence. But after coming here, he realized that everything was so different. This young loyal and courageous duke did not seem to take him or the emperor's admonition seriously. Chapter 282. Of course, if Dong Chunhua knew that even when facing Zhu Qiyu, Yang Qindong did not have the slightest bit of respect in his heart, then he would be relieved. Dong Chunhua, who was being reprimanded, felt that his momentum was rapidly declining. He could not even guarantee that if this continued, he would not be able to complete his next sentence. In order to complete his mission, he could not turn around and leave. What he had to do was to complete his mission with anger. Dong Chunhua did not want to talk to Yang Qindong anymore. He also felt that he could not gain any advantage, so he did not even look at the Duke of Zhongdan. Instead, he said what he had prepared before: the emperor has decreed that Japan has been a friendly neighbor of the great Ming dynasty for generations. Duke of Zhongdan tore down Japan's gate for no reason, beat up the envoy, and almost caused a war between the 2 countries. This is a serious crime. The Duke of Zhongdan is ordered to apologize to the Japanese envoy immediately after receiving the decree to clear up the misunderstanding and reconcile the 2 sides. Dong Chunhua had already memorized Zhu Qiyu's reprimand. Now that he opened his mouth, it was very smooth. In his words, there was a lot of dissatisfaction. When these words were heard by the students of the Yang Academy, many of them began to breathe heavily. Obviously, they were frightened. Among the students, Junko was also among them. When she heard that the Ming emperor actually asked Yang Qindong to apologize to Kimura Yoshida, the corners of her mouth naturally curled up slightly. As a Japanese, such an action of course made her feel proud. But then, her expression became a little nervous. Over the past few days, she had gained some understanding of this young Dong Shuai. Whatever he did, he would never regret. Wanting him to admit his mistake, Emperor Ming had really made the wrong decision. But in the face of the emperor's decree, what should he do? Dong Chunhua used nearly half a cup of tea's time to recite the reprimand from beginning to end. Then, when he stopped, he looked at Yang Qindong with a gleam of gloating in his eyes. Aren't you, Yang Qindong, awesome? Aren't you arrogant? Aren't you able to ignore me? Well then, now that the emperor has given the verbal order, do you still dare to disobey? Dong Chunhua had a smile on her face and regained the arrogant expression she had when she arrived. However, in the end, he did not understand Yang Qindong. As a person of the later generation, he did not have the same respect for imperial power as the ancient people. If he was facing an ancient emperor, perhaps he would lower his head out of reverence. However, substitute sect master Zhu Qiyu was clearly not one of them. Seeing that Dong Chunhua had finished speaking, Yang Qindong nodded to indicate that he understood, and then waved his hand casually. Yang Si, who had accompanied him, gestured towards Dong Chunhua, indicating that he was going to lead her away from the manor. Dong Chunhua was still waiting for Yang Qindong to express his stance. She was waiting for him to lower his head and admit his mistake. How could she be willing to leave? Seeing that he was about to become an exiled person, he said angrily, Duke of Loyalty and Courage? What he said just now was His Majesty's intention to reprimand you. Don't you have anything to say? Or do you dare to disobey an imperial edict? Dong Chunhua's words could be said to strike at the heart. If Yang Qindong dared to admit this point, then he only needed to publicize it, and a rebel hat would be placed on his head. In this way, no matter how much Zhu Qiyu admired this person, and how much he feared this person, he could only kill him. Otherwise, where would the imperial power be? Where would the imperial power be? Before coming here, there were people who said that Yang Qindong was extremely daring and that he rarely placed the great Ming dynasty's laws in his eyes. However, Dong Chunhua did not take it to heart and thought that everyone was exaggerating. Even if this person liked to rely on his abilities to be arrogant, he still had to lower his head in the face of imperial power. But now, Dong Chunhua finally knew that those people were not speaking nonsense. This Duke of Loyalty and Courage truly did not place the Emperor's verbal order in his eyes. This was because Yang Qindong was looking at him as if he was looking at a clown. This Duke already understands His Majesty's intentions. However, I don't agree with some of the points. The Japanese diplomatic group first sent people to assassinate this Duke. After the assassination failed, they wanted to use the two countries to threaten this Duke. Faced with such an aggressive situation, I only tore down the other party's door and beat up a few blind lackeys. I really don't know what crime I committed. Could it be that when encountering a problem, it's not about who is right, but whose fist is harder? When Dong Chunhua heard Yang Qindong's rhetorical question, his expression changed again and again. This person actually publicly said that he did not agree with His Majesty's words and decision. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to rebel? Dong Chunhua's heart was still changing with mixed feelings. Yang Qindong continued, Lord Dong, you don't need to use imperial power to pressure me. This time, His Majesty must have been deceived by a lowly person and made such a statement. In addition, you don't need to talk about rebellion. Presumably, this is not His Majesty's intention, but something you added at the last minute, right? If this Duke wanted to rebel, why didn't I bring Yingzong back to the capital when I saved him? This kind of thing where the Son of Heaven is used to order his vassals has happened many times in history, right? If this Duke wanted to rebel, why did I lead people to beat back the Walla army when they came to the city, and then obediently return to Zhongdan Gong? Your thinking is still too childish. It's better to go back and think about it carefully. Oh, right, this Duke also wants to advise you. In the future, if you want to question me, you should at least find someone with a higher rank, at least of the same rank as this Duke. You are just a third-rank official, you really don't deserve to have a fair conversation with this Duke. At the end, Yang Qindong laughed. However, the contempt and ridicule in that smile could be seen by anyone. He was refuted by Yang Qindong, and was even reprimanded by Yang Qindong. In the end, he was even thrown out of the manor. When Yang Si pulled him out of the manor like a little chick, Dong Chunhua's face was ashen. At this moment, he wanted nothing more than to find a hole to crawl into. Bold and presumptuous. Bold and presumptuous. Just wait for the Emperor to get angry and take away the Duke's hat. At that time, let's see how you can continue to be so imposing. Even though he was out of the manor, Dong Chunhua still shouted and shouted. Then, he angrily got on the sedan and went straight to the capital, to the imperial palace. He wanted to tell the Emperor everything that had happened here today, and then let the Emperor issue an imperial edict to punish Yang Qindong severely. Dong Chunhua left, but Yang Qindong didn't leave. He stayed on the field of the academy. His gaze swept across the nearly 70 students, and his face was solemn as he spoke. Everyone, write an article about what happened today and hand it to me before dinner. Teacher, what do you think? After Yang Qindong finished speaking, he prepared to leave, but a voice came from behind him. The person who spoke was the student, Wang Si. Wang Si and Yu Yuanbi's fight was finally released because Li Wenxiao was investigated. From this incident, he could see that as his teacher, Yang Qindong, was protecting him. This made him even more determined to choose the Yang Academy and become a student here. However, Yang Qindong still disobeyed the imperial edict, and he was worried about him. Yang Qindong, who was stopped by Wang Si, stopped. After a moment of silence, he suddenly raised his head and said, Teacher, I only know one thing, and it can be summed up in one sentence. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. When these simple words entered the ears of the students, their eyes immediately lit up and they felt as if they had been enlightened. Although the words were simple, the summary was very accurate. Just like how the Walla dared to invade the borders of the Great Ming Dynasty, wasn't it because the Great Ming Dynasty's national strength was weakening? Just like how the Japanese envoy dared to threaten the great Ming dynasty, wasn't it also because the great Ming dynasty was weak? If the great Ming dynasty was strong enough, others could only submit. How would they dare to covet the great Ming dynasty? Among the students, Junko was also shocked by these words. She thought of her father. If her father was strong enough, would he still need to be afraid of the other aristocratic families in the country? Would he still need to consider what General Ashikaga Yoshimasa would think? While the students were still thinking, Yang Qindong had already left the academy and returned to the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor. Pass down the order, pay attention to every movement in the capital. Yang Qindong had to be vigilant, although he didn't think that Zhu Qiyu would do anything because of Dong Chuanhua's report. After all, this was the territory of the great Ming dynasty. If they really turned hostile, with the strength of his subordinates, if they were not prepared, they would not be able to withstand it. And even if they were prepared, they would only be forced to leave. After all, there was a huge gap in the number of people, and it was far from being covered by an advanced firearm. Unless he wanted to kill Zhu Qiyu and those ministers, but in this way, the country would be in chaos, and it was really not a blessing for the Han people. The imperial city of the capital. When Dong Chunhua saw Emperor Zhu Qiyu, he immediately angrily told him what he had done in the Yang family manor. Your Majesty, this Duke of Loyalty simply despised the imperial power and is really a traitor. If we don't get rid of him, it will not be enough to show the imperial power. After saying that, Dong Chunhua banged his head on the ground with a thump, his face full of indignation and grievance. Shut up! Zhu Qiyu's angry roar resounded throughout the hall. What kind of person was Yang Qindong? Although Zhu Qiyu didn't know much about him, he still knew some things. At least until now, this person had not shown any intention of rebelling. Otherwise, why would he save Zhu Qizhen and block the vanguard of the Wala cavalry for him? But at the same time, this person was unconstrained and liked to be free. It was because of this that after the war, he was given the title of Duke, so that he could be free and stay away from the court, and everyone would be annoyed if they didn't see each other. Of course, it was not that Zhu Qiyu didn't want to get rid of this person. But firstly, he couldn't find a suitable excuse, and secondly, this person had a very good relationship with the mercenaries. If he wanted to make a move and failed, he would have to face the roar of the storm. Chapter 283. Without absolute certainty, Zhu Qiyu wouldn't make a move. Of course, this was also because this person didn't threaten him. At least, he hadn't shown any intention of doing so. This was also why the two of them hadn't fallen out with each other yet. But now, Dong Chunhua actually wanted him to get rid of Yang Qindong. How could he make this decision lightly? This was why he had opened his mouth to scold him. Of course, Yang Qindong didn't give him face and refused to admit his wrongs. This made Zhu Qiyu angry. But being angry didn't mean that he had to get rid of him. The new army hadn't finished training yet. The safety of the Great Ming still depended on this person. Fortunately, Yang Qindong still gave him face from Dong Chuanhua's words. He explained that he hadn't received the imperial edict and said that he had been deceived by a vile person. This gave him a way out. Suddenly stopped by Zhu Qiyu's shout, Dong Chuanhua's expression changed greatly. He didn't know what he had said wrong. He hurriedly bowed his head to the ground again. Your Majesty, please calm your anger. It's not worth it to harm your health. Official Dong was angry in a moment of anger, but it is understandable. This time, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has indeed gone too far. Jining, who had been standing to the side, saw that the emperor was angry and Dong Chunhua was frightened. She immediately stepped forward to speak as a partner. Jin Ying's words finally reached Zhu Qiyu's heart. Although he didn't want to fall out with Yang Qindong right now, this person had already done something that went against imperial authority. If he didn't do anything and word got out, it would have a big impact on his throne. Beloved official Jin, in your opinion, what should we do? Your Majesty, why don't we have minister who reprimand the Duke of Loyalty and Courage in court tomorrow? With minister who taking action, he will definitely have to reflect on his actions. Jining had a flattering smile on her face as she made a ruthless suggestion. Oh. Zhu Qiyu suddenly understood after hearing this. Not bad, not bad. Beloved official Jin's words are exactly what we want. In that case, we will hand this matter over to Hu Xiao at court tomorrow morning. Dai Zong's complexion became much better, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. When he saw Dong Chunhua kneeling on the ground, he sighed and said, "Beloved Minister Dong, you've worked hard these past few days. I already understand your intentions. In any case, Dong Chunhua's actions were for the sake of maintaining imperial power." Zhu Qiyu naturally saw this point clearly. He needed such loyal officials. Even if they were not as capable, they could still be used. Hearing this, Dong Chunhua immediately burst into tears. His head hit the ground heavily again. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty." Dong Chunhua left the palace. When she left, she was in good spirits. After the people from the intelligence bureau reported the situation back to Yang village, Yang Qindong's expression didn't change when he heard the news, but he was obviously relieved. "Young master, the army in the capital hasn't moved. It seems like they don't intend to target our Yang clan." Tiger's Mane, who had come to report the situation, shared his opinion as well. "Our acting emperor knows what's good for him." Yang Qindong's expression returned to normal as he spoke. When Yang Qindong defied the imperial edict this time, he had already prepared for the worst. That was, Zhu Qiyu would fall out with him. If that was the case, even though he had the cold blade, he had too few people. For safety's sake, he could only fight his way out of the capital. He could either meet up with Commander Gao Xiong and the others from the Tianjin garrison or go to Zhu Qizhen's place in Nanjing. After more than a year of scheming, it was certain that his estate would suffer losses. However, Zhu Qiyu wouldn't be able to gain any benefits from doing so. If everyone fell out with him, his days in the capital would definitely not be easy. This was originally a situation where both sides would suffer losses. Fortunately, Zhu Qizhen didn't choose to do so. This matter allowed Yang Qindong to see where his shortcomings were. He had too few soldiers. Even if he had advanced firearms, he wouldn't be able to intimidate the enemy. The moment something unpredictable happened, there was a high chance that he would meet his foes with weapons. "It seems like I'll have to find a chance to go out for a while," Yang Qindong muttered to himself. The cold blades test had been far too harsh, making the size of the army a huge problem. However, he had always walked the path of elite soldiers. Ordinary soldiers were not worthy of his attention. Most importantly, he did not want to see a large number of soldiers who believed in him die on the battlefield. That would be a very sad thing. The cold blade needed time to expand, and the defense of Crimson City also required large amounts of manpower and resources. In these circumstances, increasing the number of soldiers in a short amount of time was nothing more than a pipe dream. Since this was the case, it was better to leave the capital for a while and give himself enough time to develop. As long as the cold blade was strong enough, when he returned to the capital, he naturally wouldn't have to worry about anyone doing anything to him. Tiger's Mane, issue an order. Have the Bureau of Security keep an eye on the situation in Guangxi and Guangdong. At the same time, have Commander Leng Song get ready. If something happens, we're to fish in troubled waters and expand the situation. Yang Qindong recalled the Shunping Heavenly King incident that would occur 1 month later in history, the rebellion in Guangdong, and Zhu Huituan's Miao uprising. Thus, he had prepared for a rainy day and issued a military order. The Yang clan manor was safe for the time being because of Zhu Qiyu's apprehension. More importantly, he had been emperor for far too short a time, and he had inherited a terrible mess. Developing it would also require time, so he had tolerated Yang Qindong's defiance of the decree. Just because the fire had not been ignited did not mean that it would not burn. On the second day of the court session, Zhu Qiyu's first order of business was to have the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao, persuade Yang Qindong to admit his wrongs and appease the anger of the Japanese emissary. Zhu Qiyu had just arrived at court and sat on the dragon throne of the emperor, his gaze sweeping over the officials. Intentionally or unintentionally, his gaze had fallen on Hu Shao. At this moment, a young eunuch quietly walked up to Jining and whispered something to him. Originally, Jining was standing there calmly with a faint smile on his face. No one could tell what he was thinking. But when he heard the eunuch's report, his face slightly paled. The eunuch said that when the city gates opened early in the morning, the cold blade soldiers responsible for opening trade with the Walla had returned, 100 of them. This meant that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's strength in the capital had once more increased. These 100 people were not ordinary soldiers, but an army with elite and advanced firearms. He later learned that a single company of cold blade soldiers could withstand the charge of thousands or even tens of thousands of Walla's elite cavalry. Just how powerful were they? With the sudden return of an entire company of cold blade soldiers, Yang Qindong's strength had increased. If he wanted to force the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to admit his wrongs, the obstacles would be much greater. In this short period of time, Jin Ying's mind was filled with many thoughts. He suddenly felt that arranging for Hu Shao to force Yang Qindong to admit his wrongs to the Japanese emissary was an unwise move. What he needed to do now was to stop the emperor's actions. But just as he was thinking this, Zhu Qiyu called out Hu Zhao's name. Beloved official Hu, receiving the emissaries of other countries is the responsibility of your Ministry of Rights. As for the unpleasantness between the Duke of Loyalty and the Japanese emissary, we think that you should be responsible for it. In short, we need to resolve this problem in the shortest time possible. Right now, the Great Ming does not need war. Do you understand? He suddenly called out Hu Zhao's name and handed over the task that was previously agreed to be handed over to censorate official Dong Chunhua. The expressions of all the officials changed slightly at this moment. In the imperial court, where intelligent people gathered, each of them had their own thoughts. Hu Shao had been an old official for many dynasties and had seen many storms and waves. As soon as Zhu Qiyu spoke, he guessed what had happened. He thought of the news that he had received yesterday, saying that Deputy Censorate of the Left, Dong Chunhua, had returned to the palace with a furious expression not long after entering Yang village. He could already imagine what had happened. Could it be that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had defied the imperial edict? But did he really have the guts to do so? Also, could the Emperor of Loyalty and Courage really endure it? This was a great crime of defying an imperial edict. That would result in the confiscation of his property and the execution of 3 generations of his family. Depending on the severity of the situation, the execution of 9 generations of his family was not impossible. Hu Shao and the other officials all had their heads lowered as they thought about something. The atmosphere in the imperial court became incomparably stifling. As the emperor, Zhu Qiyu naturally didn't want the officials' hearts to be in chaos. If their hearts were in chaos, they wouldn't be able to do anything. He immediately explained with a smile on his face, "Beloved officials, there is no need to think too much. Our Duke of Loyalty and Courage is too rule-abiding." He said that he needed an official of the same rank to talk to him. Beloved official Dong's status is a bit too low. This is also because we didn't think about it clearly before. Therefore, this time, we sent beloved official Hu is of the same rank, to give Duke of Loyalty and Courage enough face, ha ha ha. After the explanation was given, many of the officials immediately came to a realization. But as for what everyone was thinking, perhaps only they knew in their hearts. When did an imperial edict need an official of the same rank? This was clearly the emperor borrowing Hu Zhao's hand to suppress Yang Qindong. As a result, if Yang Qindong didn't lower his head, Hu Shao wouldn't be able to explain himself. At that time, he would be accused of being unfilial. It was truly a good method. Among them, the one with an ugly expression was Dong Chunhua, who was standing in the group of officials. Seeing that the emperor's imperial favor was in his hands and that he had successfully ascended to the position, but his task had been messed up and he had been notified to all of his colleagues. It was easy to imagine how bad his mood was. But the only thing that was worth consoling was that this time, Yang Qindong didn't just slap his face, but also the emperor's face. Presumably, in order to return this slap, it wouldn't be long before the imperial edict promoting him to a second-rank official was issued. This was also why Zhu Qiyu wanted to use this matter to tell all of the officials that as long as they wholeheartedly worked for him, he would get back at them even if they were wronged. And for Dong Chunhua, this was very likely a blessing in disguise. Among the officials, the one with an ugly expression was Hu Xiao. Before this subordinate came to report, thousands of soldiers had been captured and countless military supplies had been robbed. The other party's strength is valiant and their battle prowess is extremely strong. My general requests the emperor to quickly send reinforcements. After saying that, Bing Yong kowtowed to the ground to express his impatience. What? That's impossible. Many of the officials immediately voiced their doubts. These people were the ones who had received gifts from Kimura Yoshida. They knew very well that not punishing Yang Qindong was just an excuse for the other party. As for whether they would really send troops, most likely, this person couldn't make the decision. Even if they really wanted to send troops, they couldn't have done it so quickly. Where was this emissary in the capital? How could Japan go to war without declaring war? What did he mean? What's impossible about it? Seeing the expressions of disbelief on the faces of many officials, Su Yozhen, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, reacted quickly and shouted loudly, "Can't you see that this is probably a delaying tactic by the Japanese emissary? They have been in the capital of our great Ming dynasty for some time. They know that we have just experienced several battles and our military strength is weak. Jumping out at this time is obviously to take advantage of us. It's hateful that we were so gullible and didn't take any precautions." As he spoke, Su Yozhen shook his head with some resentment, as if he was angry at his lack of vigilance. But in fact, this statement was notified to him by the Security Bureau last night. That was to say, among all the officials, he was the only one who knew the truth. As mentioned before, Su Yozhen was a powerful official of a generation in history. Those who could become powerful officials were all people with means and ambition. If such people were used well, they would become a sharp sword that could cut everything. But in the same way, if they were not used well, it was likely that they would hurt themselves. In order to achieve the purpose of using this sword well, Yang Qindong deliberately told Su Yozhen in advance. This was also to deter him and let Su Yozhen know his strength, but he couldn't see it clearly. In this way, this person didn't dare to disobey his orders and would do things for him wholeheartedly. This was why Su Yozhen suddenly jumped out and revealed the truth. Su Yozhen's words were very much in the hearts of several officials. They all nodded in agreement, as if all this was really a delaying tactic by the Japanese emissary. Japanese samurai? How many of them are there? How is their combat strength? When did this happen? When Jining suddenly heard the news, his expression changed dramatically. But he also didn't believe that the Japanese would make a move at this time. Because in his opinion, even if they wanted to make a move, they had to wait until after Yang Qindong was punished. He had a feeling that there was something fishy about this matter. But he couldn't think of any problem, so he asked this question. If the enemy had too few soldiers, could it be the work of mercenaries? This wasn't the first time he had interacted with Ling Feng. The enemy didn't have many people, but their combat strength was extraordinary. Moreover, the Tianjin garrison was not on guard. If they attacked by surprise, it was very likely that they would succeed. Since someone had asked a question, the messenger naturally had to answer it. Replying to Sir Eunuch, "It happened a few days ago. Many Japanese samurai came, and from a distance, they seemed to blot out the sky. Moreover, it happened so suddenly that my general could only retreat while fighting. After he was unable to turn the situation around, he ordered this lowly one to come find reinforcements." The Tianjin garrison's general did not immediately come to the capital to ask for reinforcements. What he reported was that he wanted to fight with the Japanese samurai. Because of this, the military situation was delayed, and the report only reached the capital a day later. Blot out the sky. Jin Ying's expression turned even uglier when he heard this description. Could it be that he was wrong and this wasn't the work of mercenaries? Otherwise, how could there be so many soldiers? If the number of mercenaries really did blot out the sky, no one would be able to stop them. Jin Ying's expression changed greatly. Who among the other courtiers did not have the same expression? Could it be that Japan really had mobilized its army to loot a burning house? Of course, they didn't know that on the battlefield, unless the two sides were actually fighting or there was an advance report, it was very difficult to accurately determine the strength of the other side's army. Just like this time, it was clearly the work of mercenaries, but Commander Gao Xiong had personally led 400 elites from the Lengfeng Navy to the Tianjin garrison, accompanied by 2,000 auxiliary soldiers from Qiqian City. For the sake of bluffing, Gao Xiong had intentionally sent out many banners so that from a distance, it would appear that the entire harbor was covered in flags. This made it very easy for people to mistake it for an army. No one had imagined that this was a smokescreen set up by Yang Qindong. Everyone only knew that the Tianjin garrison wasn't far from the capital, and if they couldn't effectively stop the enemy from approaching, another battle to defend the capital would probably begin. At that time, the victor would be obvious. Quick, which beloved official is willing to lead soldiers into battle? Zhu Qiyu didn't want another battle to defend the capital. Last time, he had spent the young master's money, which had already caused him great heartache. Now, before he could recover from his shock, another unknown battle had appeared. While he was angry, his gaze also fell on the generals in the imperial court, lingering for the longest time on Marquis Wuqinghao Shiheng. Shiheng was the general of the army, and he was also the commander in charge of building and training the new army. In the army, his strength was naturally a cut above the others. But even though he had been on the battlefield many times and had very few victories, his heart was beating like a drum. It was not the first time that he had heard the name of Japanese samurai. They were simply outlaws, and all of them were brave and good at fighting. It was said that if one wanted to become a samurai, he had to go through hundreds of selections. If he were to deal with such a powerful army, how confident would he be in winning? If he won, everything would be fine. But if he lost, would his position in the army be affected? His position was stable enough now. Did he still need to take risks and fight? The answer was, of course, no longer. There was no benefit in winning, and if he lost, he would lose his high position. Shaking his head, Shiheng looked awkwardly at Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, and knelt down. Your Majesty, the new army has just been formed and hasn't undergone any training. If we send them to the battlefield at this time, I'm afraid that they will lose more than they will win. This. Zhu Qiyu really wanted to reprimand Shiheng, but when he thought about what Shiheng said, he realized that Shiheng was right. If he really sent the untrained new army to the battlefield and suffered a great defeat, it would directly threaten his throne. What should we do? Dear ministers, do you have any other candidates to recommend? Zhu Qiyu's tone changed. He no longer stared at Shiheng, but looked at the ministers, hoping that they could come up with another result. Even Shiheng had refused, which was enough to prove that the situation was tricky. Although some of the generals were a little restless after hearing this, they considered that if they lost, not only would they be implicated, but their families would also be implicated. For a moment, they could not help but shut their mouths, lower their heads, and act like ostriches. The originally noisy hall suddenly became quiet. The ministers looked at each other, speechless. Chapter 285. This scene infuriated Zhu Qiyu to no end. When there were benefits to be had, these officials didn't behave like this. They were all eager to show that they were capable, that they could be entrusted with important tasks and that they could accomplish great things. But now that there was a problem that involved life and death, everyone had the same attitude. They would hide as much as they could. He really didn't know what he could do in the future by relying on such officials. Minister Yi, tell me. Now that the Japanese army has invaded our borders, what is the Ministry of War planning to do? Since no one took the initiative to step forward, Zhu Qiyu simply began to call out names. The first to be called was the Minister of War, Yi Ming. Since the incident just now, when the messenger knelt on the ground, Yi Ming had lowered his head like an ostrich. If he didn't raise his head, no one would pay attention to him. But now that Zhu Qiyu had called out his name, he knew that he couldn't avoid it. He could only raise his head and say helplessly, "Your Majesty, after several battles, the Ministry of War doesn't have any good generals or elite soldiers. Moreover, we've been busy building a new army. We really don't have the strength to do anything. Useless." In his anger, Zhu Qiyu didn't care about the other party's face and exploded. "Other beloved officials. Do you have any suitable candidates to recommend?" The emperor was angry, and the other officials were all afraid to avoid him. At this moment, who would dare to answer? Looking for trouble. So when this question was asked, the entire hall fell silent. What? No one has a suitable candidate. Do you want us to personally lead the army? Zhu Qiyu stood up from the dragon throne, his voice filled with boundless anger. These officials are incompetent. Seeing that the emperor was so angry, all the officials knelt on the ground and blamed themselves. But when everyone knelt, there was one person who didn't kneel. He was the one who always came up with ideas, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhen. "Your Majesty, this official has a candidate to recommend." Seeing that only Su Yozhen had stepped forward, Zhu Qiyu's eyes were filled with hope. "Beloved official Su, what candidate do you have? Quickly tell me." "This official recommends the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, Yang Qindong." Su Yozhen's expression did not change as he spoke without panting, using his calmness to pacify the agitated Zhu Qiyu. "Duke of Loyalty and Courage?" Zhu Qiyu had an expectant look on her face, but what she got in return was a sharp intake of breath. He had just reprimanded Yang Qindong and asked him to apologize to the Japanese envoy. In return, Yang Qindong disobeyed the imperial edict. For this reason, he had just arranged for Hu Shao to reprimand the other party a second time to save face and emphasize his imperial power. But now, he needed Hu Shao's help. Looking at it this way, wasn't he wrong? Wasn't he slapping himself in the face? He thought that if he had not ordered Dong Chunhua to reprimand Yang Qindong, he could have blamed the war on Yang Qindong. After all, it was true that Yang Qindong had smashed the gate of the Japanese emissary's courtyard. But now, if he had reprimanded Yang Qindong, wouldn't it mean that he had already been punished? Moreover, the capital had been targeting the Duke of Zhongdan recently, and Yang Qindong had said that Japan was a friendly country and would not do anything to them. And wasn't all of this a slap to his face? While Zhu Qiyu was still reflecting. "I second the motion." After Su Yozhen recommended Yang Qindong, the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhi, immediately stood up and expressed his position. At the same time, he couldn't help but look at the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice in a new light. He found that this person could always do amazing things at critical times. For example, when the Walla army arrived, he recommended Yang Qindong. It turned out that his approach was right. And when it came to wartime, the first person who thought of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was this person. But when it came to peaceful times, this person always made trouble for Yang Qindong. Suddenly, he couldn't see through him. "I second the motion." The Duke of Loyalty and the mercenaries have a very good relationship. Once he can be asked to help, the Japanese samurai will be defeated in one blow like the Walla cavalry. The Minister of Rights, Hu Shao, also stood up at this time. He not only seconded the motion, but also expressed his opinion. A left assistant minister and two ministers simultaneously recommended Yang Qindong. This made Zhu Qiyu's expression even more unsightly. In his heart, he knew that if he used Yang Qindong, the matter of the Tianjin garrison would be resolved. But this person's contributions were too great. If he was given a chance, how would he be rewarded after the war? Even now, he dared to defy the imperial decree. Wouldn't he rebel in the future? No, he absolutely couldn't give this person a chance. His gaze intentionally avoided Su Yozhen and the others. Zhu Qiyu said in a very resolute voice, "Commander Shi Heng, listen up. I order you to start preparing. Within 3 days, send 50,000 soldiers to the Tianjin garrison to eliminate the ethnic disturbances. There must be no mistakes. Order the embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern faction guards to immediately surround the Japanese diplomatic mission. Detain them first, then hand them over to the Ministry of Rights." In the end, Zhu Qiyu made the decision not to use Yang Qindong. He didn't care whether Shi Heng agreed or not. He directly made the decision in the name of an imperial edict. When His Highness issued an imperial edict, even if Shi Heng was 1,000 times unwilling, he still had to obey. He didn't have Yang Qindong's ability to dare defy an imperial edict. Just like that, the court assembly dispersed. After Zhu Qiyu walked out of the main hall, followed by a group of eunuchs, Hu Shao followed the other officials outside at a leisurely pace. Not far away, his eldest son, Hu Changning, hurried over. "Father, are you preparing to go to the Yang clan manor?" "What for?" Hu Shao asked with a suspicious expression. Did His Majesty arrange for father to reprimand the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, and have him do what? "Ha, Japan went to war without declaring war. At this moment, there's no reason for us to apologize to them. Thus, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is already innocent. Didn't you hear His Majesty say that the Japanese diplomatic mission needs to be handed over to the Ministry of Rights to be judged? This is His Majesty's attitude." Wang Ji, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, was walking beside Hu Shao. He immediately explained with a smile. After hearing this argument, Hu Changning realized that he had thought too much. He immediately bowed his head and cupped his hands in embarrassment. "I see. Thank you, Uncle Wang, for your advice. You don't have to thank me. Even if this old official didn't say this, you can think clearly about this small matter. Alas, it's just that sending Shi Heng to lead the new army that hasn't been trained to deal with the Japanese samurai is really a somewhat righteous act." Wang Ji shook his head lightly. He was not worried about whether Hu Zhangning could figure out the crux of the matter in a short period of time. This person had a good father and a good son-in-law. He did not have the guts to suffer losses. However, Zhu Qiyu's decision to not let Yang Qindong take command, but to let Shi Heng go, was really worrying. "Minister Wang, you don't have to worry about this. Japan is just a small country. It can't make any waves. Even if Shi Heng is temporarily trapped, with strong manpower and material support, it's not impossible to win this battle. Besides, isn't there still the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? At worst, we'll just suffer losses first. By the way, hasn't the imperial court suffered a lot in the past 2 years?" Hu Shao stroked his beard and shook his head. Obviously, he was also somewhat dissatisfied with Zhu Qiyu's decision. But he wasn't too worried. After all, it was a small country that was really difficult to put in his eyes. Perhaps. But it's unwise to send so many soldiers to the battlefield for the sake of face. How could Wang Ji not understand this truth? But when he thought about the consequences of the new soldiers going to the battlefield, what kind of losses it would cause, and how many families would be destroyed, he still felt distressed. Zhu Qiyu did not hesitate to lose the new army for the sake of face. In his eyes, Yang Qindong's contribution was too great. It was so great that if he wasn't suppressed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even so, as long as there was another way, he would try it. Even if he knew that he would have to pay a price, he had to do it. He couldn't send Yang Qindong every time a war broke out, right? Besides, the great Ming dynasty couldn't even find a good commander to lead the army. As soon as the court meeting ended, all kinds of news spread. What was worth mentioning was that the Japanese envoy, Kimura Yoshida, actually heard the news in an instant. When he first heard the news, his face was full of disbelief. Not to mention that Japan originally had no intention to fight with the great Ming dynasty, his previous words were just to pressure them. Even if the country sent troops, it was impossible for them not to inform him. Otherwise, how could they trap him? Is there any misunderstanding in this matter? Could it be that the news from the front was wrong? What if the people who appeared were not our samurai, but someone else who pretended to be them? Kimura Yoshida had a doubtful expression on his face as he asked Qi Shang, the guard who sent the news. Seeing that the envoy was still doubting the source of the news, Qi Shang anxiously said, "Kimura-sama, now is not the time to think about this. Presumably, someone is already coming here. The first thing we should do now is to leave this place. No matter what, we cannot be caught by them. Then, we will go to the Tianjin Guard. If it is really our samurai, we will join them and send troops to the capital. Then, we will ask them to release the other people of the diplomatic mission and compensate them. If it is not, then we need to find evidence to explain it to the Ming Emperor." Good, good. Hearing Qi Shang's suggestion, Kimura Yoshida nodded repeatedly. But is there still a chance to escape? Presumably, there is no time to leave through the gate, right? Kimura-sama, do you still remember the tunnel you asked me to dig? It was completed last night. We can leave from there without anyone knowing. Qi Shang's face was full of confidence. Because he didn't know the Ming Emperor's attitude, and for his own safety, he had already made some preparations. Now was the time to put them to good use. Good, good, Ichi-kun, you have done well. Let's leave. As soon as he heard that the tunnel was finished, Kimura Yoshida's face showed a satisfied expression. Chapter 286. Good. Please follow me. Aikisheng nodded. In order not to attract attention, the two didn't bring anyone else with them. They only took some silver and entered the tunnel, leaving the diplomatic mission's courtyard. Less than half an incense stick's worth of time after the two left. A large number of embroidered uniformed guards and Dongchang Fanzi appeared outside the Japanese diplomatic mission's courtyard. The one who came to carry out the mission was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Ji Guang. He first asked his subordinates who had been guarding the door, "How is it? Is there anything unusual inside?" "No, we didn't see anyone come out." "Good, everyone listen to my orders. In a moment, we will charge in and arrest everyone. Anyone who dares to resist will be killed." After Ji Guang gave the order to his subordinates, he waved his hand and broke the door open. As the embroidered uniform guards entered, the diplomatic mission's courtyard was soon filled with the sound of weapons clashing. In the face of the sudden appearance of the heavenly soldiers, the Japanese did not choose to surrender. Instead, they tenaciously resisted. However, due to the disadvantage in numbers, in just half an hour, the Japanese were dead, injured, and captured. After the battle, the courtyard was filled with the smell of blood. However, the embroidered uniform guards seemed to be used to such scenes. They lightly counted the number of captives while looking for the enemy's leader. After a while, the former envoy, Aoki Yuki, was found. However, Kimura Yoshida and his guard, Aikisheng, were missing. "Master Ji Guang, we found a tunnel that leads to the neighboring street outside. There are traces of people walking on it. It should be the missing Kimura Yoshida and Aikisheng." An embroidered uniform guard stepped forward and respectfully reported to Ji Guang. "Want to run? Pass down the order to strictly check the city gates. They must not be allowed to escape." Ji Guang said with a gloomy face. An important person had actually escaped. This was a dereliction of duty. Of course, if the two of them escaped, wouldn't it mean that they had a guilty conscience? Kimura Yoshida and Aikisheng used the tunnel to walk out of the neighboring street. When they finally walked out of the dark and damp tunnel, they could breathe a breath of fresh air. A thunderous voice fell in their ears. "How is it? The tunnel doesn't feel good, right? Hee, tie them up." The one who spoke was Yang Wu. He had been waiting here on Yang Qindong's orders since last night. Although De Ming did not notice the digging of the tunnel, the security bureau, who had already bribed the cook of the diplomatic mission, discovered the problem. How did the diplomatic corps, which did not do any work or training, suddenly increase their appetite and purchase many iron tools and bamboo baskets for digging tunnels? Yang Qindong had once taught him that any small matter could become a big matter. It all depended on whether or not it could attract your attention. After Yang San received the news, he increased the intensity of his investigation. Naturally, the matter of the underground tunnel did not escape his eyes. Thus, Yang Wu's actions came about. When the steel knife was on his neck, Kimura Yoshida still said arrogantly, "What are you doing? Am I a Japanese emissary? If you kill me, wouldn't that incite a war between the two countries? Can you bear such a sin? Sigh, you talk a lot of nonsense." Yang Wu shook his head. This kind of threat was nothing to him. If not for the sixth young master's order to keep him alive, he would have killed him long ago. However, just because he could not kill him did not mean he could not vent his anger. He raised his hand and struck Kimura Yoshida's neck. The powerful force immediately knocked him out. Qi Shang, who was beside him, shrunk back in fear. Qi Shang's reaction fell into Yang Wu's eyes. Seeing how cowardly Qi Shang was, he could not help but glare. This glare scared Qi Shang out of his 7 souls. "Don't do it, I'll knock myself out." As he spoke, Qi Shang slammed his head against the wall in front of him. His entire body was bleeding from his head and he fainted. At least he knows what's good for him. I originally wanted to teach him a lesson, but unfortunately, I can't. Seeing that Qi Shang had knocked himself out, Yang Wu sighed and said with dissatisfaction, "Brother Wu, why don't you just kill him?" Leng Feng, who came with Yang Wu to carry out the mission, suggested when he saw that Yang Wu was not satisfied. "Forget it, there's no point in killing someone who has already fainted. Let's bring him back to the young master and let him do whatever he wants with him. Let's go, put them in the carriage and transport them out of the city. I'm afraid it won't be long before this matter is discovered and the city gates will be strictly checked." Yang Wu did not dare to delay. He was afraid that there would be a mistake and delay the young master's important matters. If that happened, he could not afford to be punished. The carriage that had already been prepared rushed over. After throwing the 2 unconscious people into the carriage, it headed towards the Yongding Gate. Not long after Yang Wu and the others left the city, the inspection at the city gates became much stricter. Under Ji Guang's personal supervision, even the carriages of the nobles and officials had to be strictly checked. However, this was destined to be ineffective. In the Yang family manner, Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami were thrown into the basement that had already been dug. In the academy, Junko was originally studying. The miscellaneous knowledge taught by Yang Qindong made her indulge in it. She realized that the world was so big, whether it was the Great Ming Dynasty or Japan, they were just a part of it, not even 1/20th of it. This made her open her eyes and at the same time, she was more certain that Yang Qindong was extraordinary. When she was studying seriously, Beta Persei appeared. "Miss Junko, our young master wants to see you." Beta Persei was second only to Tiger's mane beside Yang Qindong. His presence here itself represented Yang Qindong. Junko naturally did not doubt him and walked out of the classroom and came to the front of Yang Qindong in the inner courtyard. "Let's go, I'll take you to see 2 people." After seeing Junko, Yang Qindong smiled, and then very gentlemanly made a gesture of invitation and took Junko to the basement. With Yang Qindong's identity, it was not surprising that there would be a basement in the manor. What Junko was curious about was who she was going to see. When she came down the stairs to the basement and saw the unconscious Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami, she couldn't help but turn pale. She couldn't understand how these 2 people were brought here. Weren't they the emissaries of Japan? How could Dong Shui be so bold? Wasn't he afraid of being tracked down? Junko's face changed again and again. Yang Qindong didn't care about these things and just casually nodded to Beta Persei. At this time, Beta Persei took a wooden bucket that had been prepared and poured it on the unconscious Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami. Under the water column, the 2 people were instantly awakened. When they slowly opened their eyes, they saw Yang Qindong and Princess Junko. As soon as the two people opened their eyes, Junko didn't wait for Yang Qindong's consent and quickly said in Japanese, "Don't expose this princess's identity, otherwise, I will let Dong Shuai kill you now." In such a situation, Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami could only nod their heads repeatedly in order to survive. On the other hand, Yang Qindong on the side had already understood the conversation, but he still pretended not to know anything and looked at Junko, seemingly waiting for her explanation. "Oh, nothing, I just told them to answer Dong Shuai's question honestly." Junko found a promise to make. Junko didn't want to disclose her identity, so Yang Qindong didn't point it out. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Kimura Yoshida and Beta Persei and asked in pure Chinese, "Didn't you always want to kill me? Now I'm standing in front of you, do it." On the left side of Yang Qindong was Beta Persei, and on the right side was Yang Wu. The two people were staring at him with fierce eyes, so Kimura Yoshida didn't dare to move. He shook his head and said, "Duke Zhongdan, I think all of this is a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Yang Qindong chuckled and said, "You should know that because of your threat, the emperor of the Great Ming dynasty actually wanted this duke to apologize to you, but this duke didn't agree and almost carried the crime of disobeying the imperial decree. If it weren't for your sudden attack on the Tianjin guard of the Great Ming dynasty, I'm afraid I would have bowed my head to you now." "What? That's impossible." Junko originally didn't know where Yang Qindong got the courage to arrest these two people, and what was the point of arresting them. But now, when she heard that the Japanese army had declared war on the Great Ming dynasty, her eyes suddenly widened, and she couldn't believe it. No, we don't mean to be enemies with the Great Ming dynasty, and we won't send any army to attack. Everything is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to scare your emperor." At this moment, Kimura Yoshida finally told the truth. Unfortunately, now that he had said something like that, no matter how one listened to it, it sounded like an explanation. Yang Qindong kept shaking his head after listening. "The facts are all there. The battle report of the Tianjin Guard has been sent to the capital. Do you still want to deny it?" "No. There must be some misunderstanding. It's likely that someone else is pretending to be you, intending to provoke a war between the two countries. Please investigate this matter. I'm also willing to go to the Tianjin Guard and confront the people there." Kimura Yoshida kept shaking his head, indicating that he didn't know anything. At the same time, in order to explain clearly, he was willing to confront the so-called Japanese samurai. Kimura Yoshida would make such a choice, which was exactly what Yang Qindong was worried about. That was why he kidnapped the two people here. He couldn't let the Great Ming dynasty catch them. Otherwise, things were likely to be exposed. Fortunately, before he could do anything, the two people escaped through the tunnel, which saved him a lot of trouble. Yang Qindong naturally knew what was going on, and of course, he wouldn't admit that everything was arranged by him. Seeing that Kimura Yoshida didn't admit it, he pretended to be angry and said, "Very well, the facts are all there. If you still want to deny it, then I have to use some means." Chapter 287. As soon as Yang Qindong's words fell, Beta Persei and Yang Wu laughed and walked toward Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami. With the two's martial arts, they could easily injure their internal organs, but they would never let others see any injuries on the surface. Ah! It hurts. It hurts. Soon, Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami's painful howls came from the basement. In front of Beta Persei and Yang Wu, the two's so-called self-esteem was trampled on. It didn't take long for them to urinate and defecate, and the smell of filth filled the basement. Yang Qindong gently covered his mouth and nose, turned around and walked up, and said, "Treat them well. When they confess, report to this young master." Junko followed Yang Qindong to the ground, but at this time, she was a little distracted. Obviously, she didn't believe that Japan would send troops to invade the Great Ming dynasty. At this time, Although Japan was still led by the emperor, because General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was too powerful, many things were not decided by her father. If the internal situation was unstable, how could they expand outward? Not to mention that they chose the powerful Ming dynasty. If Japan attacked a small country like Korea, Junko could still understand. After all, Japan's geographical environment was destined to make them have to go out if they wanted to achieve something. But why would they choose the great Ming dynasty? But Yang Qindong said that Japanese samurai raided the Tianjin garrison. How could this be explained? In such a matter, presumably this person would not speak without thinking. Junko had no idea in her heart. After separating from Yang Qindong, she found the captain of the guards, Kobayashi, and explained what she had just seen in the room on the ground. Kobayashi was also shocked by the news brought by Junko. "Princess, is it fake? Your Royal Highness is still in the Great Ming Dynasty. Although your identity has not been exposed, once the war starts, I'm afraid it will be difficult to hide your identity. Wouldn't this put the princess in a disadvantageous position?" "No. You don't know the emperor. For the sake of Japan, my sacrifice is nothing." Junko shook her head with a bitter smile. Japan was originally a country where men were superior to women. There, men were the sky and could do anything. Women were completely an accessory. Even in the upper echelons of society, there was a tradition of sending women to each other. As long as everything was in line with benefits, it was normal to give one's young daughter to an old man. But let's run. Shaolin still wanted to say something. For example, he didn't even have any kinship left. Wasn't this a little too cruel? However, in the end, he didn't say anything. The identity of the emperor wasn't something a nobody like him could question. Therefore, he decided to escape with the princess. Junko held a sharp dagger in her hand, enduring the unpleasant smell, and came to the front of Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami, who had fainted on the ground. After Yang Er and Yang Wu's torment, the two of them were already in a state worse than death. They were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. Even when Junko came near, they did not sense anything. Looking at these two compatriots, who are also the trusted subordinates of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who is a headache for her father emperor, Junko can't help but feel angry. How dare they be so bold to suddenly send troops to the Great Ming Dynasty? How could they not know that the current Great Ming Dynasty was not something that Japan could afford to provoke? This was simply asking for trouble. Thinking that it was because of their wrong judgment that it was likely to lead Japan into the war and greatly weaken the national strength, Junko raised the dagger in her hand with resentment, and then suddenly stabbed Kimura Yoshida, who was closest to her, in the chest. Puchi. After the dagger entered the body, there was only a muffled sound, and Kimura Yoshida died and went to see the emperor. After killing one person, Junko seemed to be interested and forgot her fear. She raised the dagger and stabbed the heart of the other guard, Ikegami. Puchi puchi. As if she was afraid that she would not be able to kill the other party, under her anger, she continuously stabbed the other party several times. In the end, she killed the two of them until they could no longer kill each other. Blood also sprayed onto her face and clothes, but she did not seem to care about it. Until she confirmed that the two people were dead, she dragged her tired body and walked out of the underground room. Furthermore, all of this had happened without anyone stopping him. It was as if it had happened without anyone knowing. But Junko didn't know that there was a very hidden room on the side of the basement. There seemed to be an earthen wall, but in fact, it was just a disguise. There was a double-sided transparent glass that was taller than it would be a few hundred years later. From there, one could clearly see everything that was happening in the basement. Looking from the inside to the outside, there was nothing unusual. "Did you record it?" Yang Qindong looked at Beta Persei, who was fiddling with the camera for the first time. "Young master, it's all recorded. According to your request, I also recorded a few close-ups to clearly record the scene of Junko killing the two Japanese envoys," Beta Persei said as if he was showing off. Very good, arrange for someone to send it to Commander Gao Xiong, and then let him arrange for someone to send it to Japan. Remember, you must personally send it to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Yang Qindong said with confidence. He never had any good impression of Japan. It was only a matter of time before he dealt with them. And before that, in order to achieve his goal more easily, internal strife was one of the best ways. He believed that with this solid evidence, Ashikaga Yoshimasa could use it to attack the emperor, and Japan's internal strife was already a fact. At that time, it would be impossible for Junko not to stand on his side. Speaking of which, after knowing Junko's identity, Yang Qindong had always had a plan. And step by step, it was carried out smoothly, until now, it finally paid off. With this video as evidence, he didn't have to worry about Japan's internal strife. At that time, his opportunity would come, and he could even send troops to Japan on the grounds of supporting Junko's restoration. At that time, it wouldn't be difficult to occupy the entire Japan and make it return to its ancestral land. Junko didn't know these things. On the contrary, after killing people, she thought that no one would find her. After returning to her room, she quickly changed into a clean set of clothes and went to the academy. She really did what she should do. There were no side effects or discomfort after killing people for the first time. Yang Qindong also acted as if nothing had happened. It's just that the scene of Junko killing Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami has been recorded perfectly. Not only that, he also took a copy of it to the warehouse, and then took out a copy and a tablet that could play the video. When the time comes, he only needed to take it to Japan and play it. Presumably, it would cause an uproar. It was equivalent to handing General Ashikaga Yoshimasa a butcher's knife, so that he could raise it high and do whatever he wanted. Chapter 288. Because the Japanese samurai suddenly attacked the port of Tianjin, Yang Qindong's so-called crime of disobeying the imperial edict was not pursued. Since they had already made their move, there was no point in asking the Duke of Loyalty to make any more promises. The Yang village quieted down. Yang Qindong was his own teacher at the Yang Academy. From time to time, he would interact with the students and discuss some problems that people could not solve at that time. When he returned to the inner courtyard of the Yang village, he interacted with the several madams, thinking of ways to create the next generation. In contrast to Yang Qindong's leisure, the commander-in-chief in the capital, Shi Heng, was so busy that his feet did not touch the ground. The emperor only gave him 3 days to gather 50,000 soldiers and send them to Tianjin. However, most of these soldiers had not undergone systematic training. Most of them came to the military camp on the basis of their hot-bloodedness. Many of them were even influenced by Yang Qindong and joined the army. However, it would be very difficult for these people to win a battle. After Shi Heng returned to the army, he issued the order to prepare for war and allowed everyone to take the initiative to sign up. The result of this action could be said to be the result of breaking his heart. According to the amount of money Zhu Qiyu had given them, the number of new recruits this time was close to 200,000. However, when the order to prepare for war was issued, there were not even 5,000 people who took the initiative to sign up. Looking at the statistics, Shi Heng said angrily to his subordinates, "Since they don't take the initiative to sign up, then force them to do it. As for how to do it, you can decide for yourselves. In short, at this time tomorrow, I want to see 50,000 soldiers ready to go to war." After throwing these words to his subordinates, Shi Heng went straight to the Ministry of Justice. Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami had escaped and even disappeared without a trace. However, the previous envoy, Aoki Yuki, was still caught by the genie guards and was now locked up in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Shi Heng came to see Aoki Yuki to get more information, such as how many soldiers Japan had sent this time, who was the commander, and what his personality was like. One had to say that Aoki Yuki was rather unlucky. First, he failed to assassinate Princess O'Hara Junko, and then Yang Qindong found an opportunity to accuse him of disturbing the peace of the capital and assassinating an important official. After which, he was arrested by the Bureau of Rights and imprisoned for several months. Finally, Kimura Yoshida appeared and rescued him. But in just a few days, he was caught again. He had nothing to say except for lamenting his bad luck. Not only did he accept his fate, but he also didn't know what to say when faced with the torture tools of the Ministry of Justice. He really didn't know anything about the sudden appearance of the Japanese army in Tianjin, or how many people had come, or who the general was. Faced with all kinds of torture instruments that he could not name, although he was extremely afraid, he still did not say the answer that Shirheng wanted in the end. It seems that he really doesn't know. Shirheng personally saw the scene of Aoki Yuki being tortured. Aoki Yuki only shouted that he was wronged and fainted twice, but he still didn't say anything valuable. He couldn't help shaking his head angrily and said, "Forget it. Since that's the case, it's useless to keep this person alive. Just kill him and let the army use him as a sacrifice." Normally, when two countries go to war, envoys are not to be killed. However, Japan went to war without declaring war, and Aoki Yuki did not appear as a true envoy, so even if he was killed, it would still be reasonable. Just after Shirheng said this, Aoki Yuki, who was still a little dizzy, suddenly shouted loudly, "No! You can't kill me. I know that an important person of our Japanese royal family is in the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty. I know it." "Oh. Is there such a thing?" Originally, Qin Haodong didn't expect to scare him. He just wanted to kill him to boost the morale of the army. He didn't expect that he would force out such a big news. Thinking that if he could find this important member of the royal family, he could not only learn more about the movements of the Japanese army, but also make the enemy hesitate to attack. Shirheng's eyes suddenly lit up. He strode to Aoki Yuki and said, "Tell me, who is that person? Where is he now? I need to rest. I need someone to treat me. Otherwise, I won't say anything even if you kill me." Aoki Yuki took this opportunity to put forward his condition. Aoki Yuki had been injured twice. If he was not treated at this moment, he would bleed to death. Although Shirheng wanted to know immediately, he knew that sometimes the will of a dying person could not be measured by ordinary means. He nodded immediately. "I can ask someone to treat you right away. I can also give you good food and drink. I can even promise to let you continue to live. But remember, if you don't say his name and dare to play tricks on Marquis, I promise that you will beg for death." "Humph. Come on, take him to be treated." Aoki Yuki finally survived. And as Shirheng said, he ate well, drank well, and even had a good sleep. But early the next morning, when he just opened his eyes, he found Shirheng standing in front of him in a suit of armor. From this, it could be seen that Shirheng was already impatient. After seeing Aoki Yuki open his eyes, his voice immediately sounded in his ears. "Marquis, whether you have rested well or not, and whether you want to say something or not, I only want to tell you one thing. I'll only tell you one thing. You have 10 breaths of time to tell me the identity and hiding place of that person. Otherwise, I'll kill you with a swing of my blade." After saying this with a cold face, Shirheng pulled out his sharp waist saber and slowly moved it toward Aoki Yuki's neck. As he moved closer, he said, 10, 9, 8, 7, cold sweat immediately flowed down Aoki Yuki's neck. He could feel that the other party wasn't just scaring him. He really wanted to kill him. At the same time, he began to think rapidly in his mind whether he should tell the other party that Junko was the princess. 3, 2. When he counted to 2, Aoki Yuki's body trembled. It was better to live than to die. Although he didn't know if he could survive after telling the other party, if he didn't say it, he was sure that he would die right now. Even if he could only live a little longer, it was still a glimmer of hope. He immediately shouted, I'll tell you, I'll tell you. She is the daughter of our emperor, Princess Junko O'Hara. She is now in the Yang family manor. The army in the capital was gathering, and all kinds of useful information flew to Yang Qindong's desk like snowflakes. Yang Qindong shook his head when he saw that the 50,000 soldiers had already been selected. Most of them were poor soldiers who couldn't afford to send money to the Baihu and Qianhu because they didn't have the money or power to send them to the front lines. When two armies fought, no matter how good the timing, location, and people were, there was one thing that was more important, and that was the morale of the soldiers. If one didn't have this, no matter how many soldiers they had, they were likely to lose the battle. Fortunately, the opponent this time wasn't the real Japanese army, but the Yang family navy led by Gao Xiong. They must be anxious because of the lack of manpower, and these 50,000 soldiers were sent to their doorstep. Of course, they wouldn't reject them. Pass this information to Commander Gao. At the same time, tell him to capture as many prisoners as possible. These people don't have any complicated backgrounds, and they are all useful people. Yang Qindong said to Tiger's Mane, and then handed over a stack of information. Hee, young master, this time Commander Gao will be very happy. Tiger's Mane thought that if they could capture these able-bodied men, it would greatly alleviate the problem of the lack of young men in Qiqian City. He couldn't help but smile and say, "Yes, he will be happy for a while." Yang Qindong also nodded with a smile on his face. Since they were forced to be selected, then those who had a little bit of background, and even those who were rich, wouldn't be included. This time, Shi Heng did a good thing, and gave him so many good soldiers. Just as he thought of Shi Heng's name, Yang Wu's voice came from outside the study room. "Young master, there is a large group of people outside the manor. It seems like there are soldiers, imperial guards, and some eunuchs." Huh? Yang Qindong, who suddenly heard the news, showed a puzzled expression in an instant. Now that the war was imminent, no one should care about him, but why did so many people come? If they were looking for trouble, then it didn't make sense. In front of an external enemy, the most taboo thing was internal instability. Who had the guts to look for trouble at this time? "Young master, I will immediately send people to be on alert." Hearing that so many people came uninvited, Tiger's Man's body was overflowing with murderous intent. Appropriate precautions will be enough. They don't have the guts to look for trouble with young master. Yang Qindong shook his head decisively. If someone really wanted to do something bad to him, they would definitely not choose this time. Anyone with a little brain should know that this was not the time for internal strife. When Yang Qindong heard the news, Shi Heng from the outer court of Yang Manor had already arrived with a large group of people. Aoki Yuki actually said that the daughter of the Emperor of Japan, Her Royal Highness, was in Yang Manor. This news made him excited and worried. He was excited because if the news was true, he could get more information about the enemy by capturing the princess. At the same time, he could use this to threaten the enemy not to act rashly. He was worried because this matter involved Yang Manor, which meant that it was related to the Duke of Loyalty. If the news was wrong and Aoki Yuki was talking nonsense, then he would become a gun in the hands of others. What a stupid thing to do. Shi Heng was very smart. Not only did he have his own methods to lead troops to war, but he also had his own set of standards in dealing with people. At least he knew who he could deal with, who he could offend, and who he shouldn't. Chapter 289. In his mind, Yang Qindong was one of those people that he couldn't afford to provoke, perhaps even the most important one. This was because this young man had achieved success at a young age, had a straightforward temper, and possessed considerable strength. If he were to offend him, it would truly be troublesome. Until his position was sufficiently stable, he didn't want to have anything unpleasant happen to him. Even in the imperial court, when everyone was impeaching Yang Qindong for his actions, he had cleverly refrained from taking a stand, only following the crowd. He didn't object, but he also didn't deliberately support anything. But this time, the matter that Aoki Yuki had brought up was far too important, so important that he would rather offend Yang Qindong than take the risk. Thus, he had come just so that he wouldn't push things too far. Not only had he come, he had also requested the imperial decree to invite the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Hu Changning, and the imperial horse supervisor, Ru Zhu. He had invited Hu Changning because of his special relationship with Yang Qindong. With this person present, the matter wouldn't become so awkward that no one would be able to extricate themselves from the situation. He had invited Ru Zhu because he was one of His Majesty's subordinates. He wanted him to see everything so that His Majesty could better understand the situation. Outside the Yang clan manor, Shi Heng, Hu Changning, and Ru Zhu led a group of more than 100 people to stand in front of the manor. They allowed the servants of the Yang clan manor to enter and report, not showing the slightest hint of impatience on their faces. This alone was enough to express their sincerity. However, this kind of sincerity could only be given to Yang Qindong, the loyal duke. If it was any other minister, they would not enjoy such treatment. Once they had any doubts, they would directly kill their way in. How could they be so polite to you? Even if the other party was courteous, Yang Qindong couldn't just remain in the inner courtyard, and this wasn't even mentioning that his father-in-law was here. Under the protection of a group of mercenaries in camouflage uniforms, he came forward in a green robe. Camouflage uniforms held a special meaning in the eyes of important officials. Putting aside everything else, just the advanced firearms in their hands were enough to make countless people envious. But the only one in the capital who could truly command them was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. It was said that not even the emperor could afford to invite him. The camouflage uniform also represented an existence that could not be offended. This was because not only did they represent themselves, but they also had a powerful force behind them. If they really offended them, fought with them, and suffered casualties, then who knew if the army behind them would send a large army to deal with them? If it really came, would the great Ming dynasty be able to withstand it? These were all unknowns. It was precisely because of the unknown that no one dared to try. This made the army seem even more mysterious and powerful. Now, as soon as these mercenaries appeared, it could be seen that there was a commotion in Shi Heng's troops. It was obvious that not only the officials, but even the soldiers knew how powerful these mercenaries were. Ha ha ha, I didn't know that the three of you would be honored by my presence. Please excuse me for not going out to meet you, Yang Qindong said as soon as he appeared and bowed to everyone. Everyone knew that this bow was for his father-in-law, Hu Zhangning, so other than him cupping his fists to return the bow, Shi Heng and Ru Zhu both smiled and did not say anything. After the salute, Yang Qindong still had a full smile on his face, but when he spoke, his confidence was obviously a bit stronger. But I don't know why you came to my Yang family village and made such a big scene. What's the matter? Doubts always needed someone to solve them. When Shi Heng and Ru Zhu's eyes fell on Hu Zhangning, although he was unwilling, he could only open his mouth and say, Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the matter is like this. The former Japanese envoy Aoki Yuki pointed out that there is a very important person in Japan in our great Ming dynasty, and he is in the Yang village. This time, we came to take this person away. As soon as Hu Zhangning's words fell, Yang Qindong's eyebrows slightly furrowed at first, but then they quickly relaxed. He finally knew the purpose of the other party's visit. It seemed that the fact that Junko was the princess of Japan had been exposed. Yang Qindong had already mentally prepared for this. After all, the fact that Junko was the princess of Japan was not a secret. In addition, she was originally beautiful and was cultivated as a seed by the Emperor of Japan. There were too many people who knew her. It was too difficult for such a famous person to not be known by others. Fortunately, this person's value had been used when he killed Kimura Yoshida and Aikishang yesterday. It was not a waste to keep him around for so long. But there were more important things that required Junko's cooperation in the future. How could he just hand her over like this? Not to mention, what kind of place was the Yang village? How could they allow others to take people away just like that? He was a little unwilling in his heart, but since his father-in-law said so, it was absolutely impossible to drive him away directly. He still had to give face. When he looked at his father-in-law, his eyes were full of smiles. So that's how it is. In that case, let's arrange for Junko to come here. Tiger's Mane, go and bring her out. Yes, young master. Tiger's Mane nodded and turned to leave. His mind was full of the look that Yang Qindong gave him, as if to remind him of something. When he considered that the young master treated Junko differently, he made a decision. That was to tell Junko everything, at least let her be mentally prepared first. As for whether she was the princess of Japan or not, it was not a problem that he needed to consider at all. Tiger's mane left to find Junko, and Yang Qindong waved his hand. Yang Wu and the others immediately placed a large table here, and someone served tea and 4 stools, as if they were here to entertain guests. On the surface, Yang Qindong seemed to welcome the arrival of Hu Jiangning and the others, but the way he treated them outside the door fully expressed the displeasure in his heart. Since they had come uninvited, then there was no need for them to enter the manor. They could just stay here. As long as they could hand over Junko, it didn't matter to Shi Heng and the others whether they entered the village or not. Yang Qindong's past experience taught them that it was best not to provoke him unless they felt that they were strong enough. Otherwise, it was better to avoid him. Even if there were some things that couldn't be avoided, it was best not to enter the village. The 3 of them sat at the temporary table without the slightest bit of displeasure. They drank their tea in satisfaction and were even able to reveal the scene of them chatting and laughing. Yang Qindong's face had been maintaining a formulaic smile, but the more it was like this, the more no one dared to look down on him. Even Shi Heng secretly observed him several times. He found that the more contact he had with this person, the more he couldn't see what this person was thinking. It had already been proven that this kind of person was the most terrifying. He couldn't help but think that if Hu Jiangning didn't come with him today, it would be impossible to make him hand over Junko. He couldn't help but feel lucky that he had found such a good helper. In the Yang Family Academy, Junko, who was still in class, was called out by Tiger's mane. She opened her beautiful eyes, blinking and looking very puzzled, but her heart was like a drum being beaten by a heavy hammer, completely not as calm as she looked on the surface. Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami were dead, killed by her. Although there was no movement afterward, Junko had always been worried about being suspected. After all, she was the person who went to the basement, and knew the existence of these 2 people. She didn't know whether Yang Qindong had told others who was in the basement. If he did, it would be better, at least everyone would be suspected. However, if he was the only one who was told, then there was really no way to escape from it. Junko looked innocent. Tiger's mane had to say something, because this was originally the young master's hint. "Miss Junko, please come with me, there are many people outside the village, saying that they are looking for you, and that you have another identity." After saying this, Tiger's mane didn't look at Junko at all. From a certain point of view, he had already determined that there was something unusual between her and the young master, so she was an existence that he absolutely couldn't offend. Tiger's mane then turned around and took the lead to leave, leaving Junko as if she was struck by lightning. Another identity? In fact, she should have thought about it. Her existence was not a secret in the upper class of Japan. Even if Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami knew about her, then it was inevitable that others would also know about her, so how could killing 2 people solve the problem? Now, they came to find her, so what should she do? When the war between the Great Ming Dynasty and Japan began, her existence was originally a very good target to be used. Even if she was the leader, such a person would certainly not be let go. "Well? Miss Junko, why don't you go? Are you not feeling well?" After a few steps, Tiger's mane found that there was no one behind him, so he turned around and asked with concern. I'm not feeling well." It seemed that she was reminded by Tiger's mane, or maybe it was a targeted hint. Junko suddenly covered her stomach and said, "Oh, I don't know what's going on. My stomach hurts." "Hurts? Is it serious? I'll immediately find a doctor for you." Tiger's mane's face was nervous, but his eyes were actually filled with appreciation. This woman was not stupid, at least she knew what was called a donkey going down a slope. Outside Yang village, after about the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, Tiger's mane came out again. Shi Heng and the others immediately noticed that when this person appeared, there was no one else around him. For a moment, they couldn't help but look at Yang Qindong doubtfully. Their eyes seemed to be questioning him. In this regard, Yang Qindong was too lazy to look at them. He still sat there and casually drank tea, completely ignoring the three people's 6 eyes. Hu Zhangning was his father-in-law, he would respect him, and he must respect him. But this did not mean that he had to unconditionally retreat in the face of anything. This time, allowing the 3 people to sit here and drink tea was already giving enough face, at least if they wanted to ask him for help, that was a fool's dream. Chapter 290. Obviously, Tiger's mane understood the meaning of Yang Qindong and walked out alone. After a while, under the doubtful eyes of several people, Tiger's mane came to Yang Qindong's side and said in a voice that everyone could hear. "Young master, Miss Junko is sick, and the doctor is treating her." How can it be so coincidental? Before Yang Qindong could say anything, Ru Zhu, who heard it, already stood up with a look of disbelief. Looking at him, he almost reached out and accused Yang Qindong of lying. "What do you mean by coincidental? Sick is sick. Is it possible that this is also fake?" Dealing with a eunuch, although this person's status in the eunuch group was not low, but after Yang Qindong showed his fangs in a timely manner, there were few people who could put him in his eyes. Therefore, to deal with Ru Zhu, there was no need for him to say anything. Tiger's mane on the side took over the words and asked with an unhappy face. Tiger's mane often appeared around Yang Qindong, but those who knew Duke of Loyalty naturally knew about this servant. Seeing that a servant dared to talk to him like this, Ru Zhu felt great shame. "Who do you think you are? With your identity, you dare to talk to me like this? What is his identity?" "My brother. You, on the other hand, aren't even considered a normal person. Who allowed you to strut around here?" Yang Qindong, whose expression was as usual and whose gaze was calm, suddenly raised his head and stared at Ru Zhu with a questioning tone. The status of eunuchs in the Ming dynasty was so high that few other dynasties could compare with it. Even in a certain period of time, the strength of the eunuch group was second only to the emperor, and much higher than the ministers. This also made some people arrogant and felt superior to others. But now, someone pointed out their biggest weakness, that is, the incompleteness of their body. How could Ru Zhu's face look good? Duke of Loyalty? What do you mean by this? Are you looking down on this eunuch? Okay, you can say that to others, but don't brag in front of this duke. Yang Qindong looked at Ru Zhai, who was like a red-eyed rooster. Yang Qindong didn't pay any more attention to him. Instead, he looked at Hu Zhangning and said, "Father-in-law, Miss Junko is sick. Naturally, she can't come out to meet guests. And this person is just an ordinary businessman in Japan, the so-called princess identity is simply nonsense. I think this is simply a lie before Aoki Yuki's death, to make us have internal discord, so we don't fall into his trap. Let's leave this matter as it is." It seemed very casual talk, but in fact, this matter was the matter. That was, Yang Qindong didn't believe that Junko was the princess of Japan. Whether other people believed it or not, they should treat it as if they didn't believe it. Okay, since Duke of Loyalty said so, this old man will naturally believe it. Hu Zhangning of course knew where to turn. This time, he came personally to give face to Shiheng. As for whether this matter would succeed or not, it was not something he should worry about. Hu Zhangning got up and looked like he was about to leave. Ru Zhu looked at the side and gritted his teeth. This was clearly Yang Qindong and Hu Zhangning in cahoots. He could only look at Shiheng and said, "Wukinghao, you see, fine, since Duke of Loyalty is the guarantor, then Marquis will naturally believe it. Sorry to bother you this time." Shiheng was a smart person. After knowing that this matter was impossible, he immediately backed down. One was the famous Duke of Loyalty, the other was the eldest son of the Minister of the Ministry of Rights who served several emperors. Which one of them was easy to deal with? Now, his main task was to prepare troops to support the Tianjin garrison. As long as this battle was won, it would establish his position and strength in the army. At that time, if there was a chance, he would have some strength to compete with Yang Qindong. So what if he backed down now? What's more, if this Miss Junko was really a princess of Japan, it would be a good thing to let her stay by Yang Qindong's side. She would be a cannon that would explode sooner or later. Shi Heng had his own thoughts, so he went along with the conversation. Ru Zhu knew that it was impossible for him to get anything out of this. But today, he hit a wall here, so he remembered this grievance in his heart. One day, he would definitely return it. At that time, he would let Yang Qindong know that a eunuch like him could not be offended. Everyone left. Originally, they wanted to take Junko away, but because Yang Qindong acted shamelessly, they did not even see her. It seemed that the thunder was big but the rain was small. But that was not the case. The words Shi Heng said when he left were actually a trap set by the sixth young master. The words, Duke of Loyalty, had already damaged the relationship between Yang Qindong and Junko. If this person was really a princess of Japan, then he would have to bear all the consequences. This seemingly unintentional sentence was, in fact, a sharp blade was hidden in it. If it were someone else, they would naturally be worried at this moment, but in Yang Qindong's eyes, this was not a problem at all. The reason why Shi Heng did not make things difficult for him now was that he wanted to wait until he was stronger. But he did not know that as time passed, the expansion of the Yang Xie's new army was much faster than the growth of the Ming dynasty's army. In other words, the longer the time passed, the bigger the gap between the two sides would be. At that time, how could Yang Qindong be afraid of Shi Heng? Not to mention, there was already a chance to deal with him. Inform Regiment Commander Gao to make preparations in the Tianjin garrison. We must serve our commander-in-chief comfortably. Tiger's mane certainly understood what comfortably meant. Although Shi Heng seemed to give Yang Qindong a lot of face on the surface, it was just an act. He wanted the Duke of Loyalty to ignore his existence and development. If he really wanted to give face, then he should not have brought people here today. He should have just sent someone to ask and go through the motions. But he did not do that. Instead, he brought a lot of people here, which already proved that he regarded Yang Qindong as his opponent. More importantly, both sides relied on the military. Even so, how could they get along with each other in harmony? With his shameless methods, Shi Heng naturally could not complete the fact that he had an extra bargaining chip in his hand. But he was not discouraged, or it could be said that he did not have much hope in the matter of Junko. In his view, when two armies confronted each other, it was a competition of strength. This included military strength, financial strength, and national conditions. And these Ming dynasty warriors should be much stronger than the Japanese samurai. Even so, what was there to be afraid of? He only needed to fight steadily. Once he reached a stalemate with the Japanese army, the final victory would belong to him. So after returning to the capital, Shi Heng did not show any displeasure. He still followed the previous plan to prepare provisions, uniforms, and weapons for the 50,000 soldiers who were about to set out. While Shi Heng was making all the preparations, Gao Xiong was also making preparations at the Tianjin garrison port. Today was the day Shi Heng set out with the army from the capital. Gao Xiong also received the order from the sixth young master to serve the commander well. This time, the person who came with Gao Xiong from the sea to Tianjin garrison was Battalion Commander Nie Tong. In the temporary command center, there was a huge sand table, which showed the complete topography of the nearby area. It was easier to see the situation and make better military decisions. The sand table showed that the distance from the capital to Tianjin garrison was less than 300 li. In other words, if the army was fast enough, they could reach here in just one day. Of course, the roads in the Ming dynasty were not developed. It was very difficult for 50,000 soldiers, and most of them were infantry, to travel 300 li in one day. Even elite soldiers could not do it. But Gao Xiong still made arrangements and called several battalion commanders and company commanders to discuss countermeasures. The Yang Xie new army had a good tradition. Before the battle plan was decided, everyone had the right to make suggestions. But once the plan was decided, no one could have any other doubts. There was only one thing to do, and that was to carry out the plan with all their strength. Today, as usual, everyone put forward their own suggestions. Led by battalion commander Nie Tong and 2 company commanders, they suggested to set up an ambush in the Langfang between the capital and Tianjin garrison. They would first give the enemy a heavy blow and break their morale. The Langfang was only 40 li away from the capital and 60 li away from Tianjin garrison. It was closely connected to the 2 places, giving it a unique position. It was also a place that one had to pass through to reach Tianjin garrison from the capital. Nie Tong and the others had chosen this place for the first battle. It could be seen that they had put a lot of thought into it. However, Gao Xiong vetoed this plan. In his words, since everyone could see that the Langfang was such an important place, how could Shiheng not know? How could he so easily fall into this trap? Since they could not set up an ambush in the Langfang, Nie Tong asked, "Commander Gao, are we going to fight the Great Ming army in Tianjin garrison?" The 6th young master said that in order to not reveal our true identities, it is best not to use firearms in this battle. We only have 2,000 people, so how can we be a match for the 50,000 Great Ming army? Who said we can't win if we don't use firearms? Who said we can only fight them in Tianjin garrison? Have you forgotten the sparrow tactics taught by the 6th young master? Gao Xiong laughed, as if he had a card up his sleeve. Sparrow tactics was a guerrilla tactic commonly used by China's militia to defeat the strong with the weak. Groups formed by the militia would come and go, gather and disperse, and be proactive and flexible. They would appear and disappear mysteriously to attack the enemy. During the War of Resistance against Japan, the militia of the anti-Japanese base would sometimes be in 2s or 3s, and sometimes in groups. They would appear in the mountains, forests, narrow valleys, tunnels, dark holes, and green gauze tents. Like sparrows pecking at food, they would shoot here and there, catching the enemy off guard and attacking them fiercely. Chapter 291. When the enemy counterattacked, they would immediately retreat and conceal themselves without a trace. When the enemy retreated, they would charge forward with the sound of gunfire and the sound of killing filled the air. This would cause the enemy to be unable to hit them, unable to chase after them, unable to eat well, unable to sleep soundly, uneasy, and battered. In summary, there were 3 points: ambush, ambush, and obstruct. Sparrow tactics. After hearing this, Nie Tong and the other company commanders couldn't help but feel shocked. They instantly thought of the Great Ming dynasty's army being split up and thrown around in circles. Yes, it is the sparrow tactics, Gao Xiong said with a decisive tone. Then, he pointed at the sand table and continued, "In this battle, we can't use a large amount of firearms. This means that our greatest advantage has been suppressed. If we want to win with a few people, we can only use sneak attacks and harassment. Fortunately, our cold vanguard soldiers are elites. They are all 1 in 100, or even 1 in 1,000. Even the 2,000 auxiliary soldiers accompanying us are slightly stronger than the Great Ming dynasty's elites. As long as we adopt the strategy of having the veteran lead the troops, with one Ling Feng leading 5 auxiliary troops, breaking up the whole into smaller groups and harassing them in small groups, we will be able to give the enemy the impression that there are soldiers everywhere. When they are exhausted, we will suddenly gather in one place and launch a large encirclement and annihilation. This battle will be decided." Gao Xiong's expression was serious, but his eyes were filled with excitement. After he finished speaking, he looked at Nie Tong and the others and said, "In this battle, we will use our actions to tell the 6th young master and all the soldiers and civilians in Crimson City that we can not only be dragons of the sea, but also tigers of the land. Yes, we are not only dragons of the sea, but also tigers of the land." Nie Tong and the others stood solemnly and roared excitedly. Under Gao Xiong's leadership, the strategy was set. Next, it was time to redistribute the soldiers. In order to achieve the effect of having soldiers everywhere, the 400 cold vanguard soldiers were divided into squads. The first squad had 10 people and 50 auxiliary soldiers. This way, each squad had 60 soldiers. This way, they could hide themselves well and launch small-scale attacks. At the same time, they could train their troops. Presumably, after this battle, some of the auxiliary troops would have the opportunity to enter the cold front. There were exactly 4,000 people, divided into 40 small groups. After a day, they disappeared from the Tianjin Guard, hiding in the vast sea of commoners. According to Gao Xiong, this time, not only did they want to attack the great Ming dynasty's army, but they also wanted to abduct a large number of people. With the rapid development of Crimson City, it could be said that the city changed every day. If they wanted to maintain this speed, they needed a lot of manpower. Even the elderly and children could be used. Using the sparrow battle tactic, the soldiers infiltrated the commoners and encouraged them to bring more poor people to Crimson City. They would work hard and contribute to the development of the city and their beautiful future. The sparrow tactics began to be implemented. More than 2,000 cold fronts were like leaves blown by a strong wind, disappearing without a trace overnight. However, Commander-in-Chief Shi Heng, who was cautiously rushing to the Tianjin garrison, was unaware of all this. Not only that, but as Gao Xiong expected, the army was moving forward steadily. Originally, it was less than 300 kilometers away. Logically speaking, it would take at most 1.5 days for the army to reach this place. However, 2 days had already passed, and the army was still searching outside Langfang City. Shi Heng believed that if he were in Gao Xiong's shoes, he would definitely set up an ambush here. Therefore, as soon as they entered Langfang City, the army of 50,000 became extremely cautious and searched the villages one by one. They stayed here for 2 days, and it turned out that they did not find any enemies here. It seems that the Japanese army is afraid. Very good, order the army to speed up and enter the Tianjin Guard as soon as possible to eliminate these foreign races. The Emperor is still waiting for our report of victory. Since they did not encounter any danger in Langfang City, Shi Heng's originally cautious heart became much bolder. He thought that the Japanese army was not familiar with the terrain and did not dare to come out to fight. Therefore, he became bolder and ordered the army to speed up and go straight to their destination, Tianjin Guard. However, as soon as they took a big step, accidents began to appear one after another. Originally, they were prepared to have a good night's rest and go straight to Tianjin Guard tomorrow. However, during the night of camping in the wild, the entire military camp was attacked from all directions. Fire crossbows were used to attack from afar, short bows were used to attack from close range. In just one night, more than 5,000 Ming soldiers lost their place to rest, and about 2,000 of them suffered different degrees of trauma. According to the final summary of the data, at least 7 or 8 strongholds were attacked. In other words, at least 7 or 8 enemy forces launched a sneak attack on them tonight. How can there be so many? How many people are there in the Japanese army? Looking at the summary of the battle report, Shi Heng's eyebrows had long been knitted together. Because of the darkness, the great Ming dynasty's army couldn't clearly see how many enemies there were. They could only hear bursts of battle cries coming from all directions. The soldiers, who had already become timid because of their excessive caution, began to retreat when they heard the shouts. How could they have the time to see how many enemies there were and what kind of weapons they were holding? Without a specific battle report, Shi Heng could not make an accurate judgment, which also caused him to be unable to find a better solution to the surprise attack in front of him. The only thing he could do was to shrink the army and set up defenses carefully. However, this was a passive defense. Not only did it greatly delay the speed of the march, but it also shook the morale of the army. However, Shi Heng did not have a good solution for these elusive opponents. If he sent a large group of people out to encircle and suppress them, they would not be able to find them at all. It would only be a waste of manpower and resources. If he sent a small group of troops, they often did not return or returned with heavy injuries. A small group of people who were lucky came back and said that the enemy seemed to be everywhere and endless. After staying outside Langfang City for 2 full days, they had been attacked more than 60 times. That was to say, of the 40 small branches under Gao Xiong's command, every single one of them had attacked at least once. More than half of them had attacked at least twice. Under so many attacks, the result was that the Ming army lost nearly 10,000 people. Most of them were injured, and not even 1/10 of them were killed. The battle losses were not small. After all, they had lost 1/5 of their troops without even seeing the enemy. They did not dare to imagine what the result would be if they faced the enemy head-on. Of course, this was because the Ming army was mostly new and had not been on the battlefield and had no experience. However, the most important factor was the flexibility, speed, and stealth of the sparrow battle. That feeling of being everywhere, yet unable to be touched or found was extremely annoying. We can't wait here any longer. We need to go to the Tianjin garrison. Pass down the order, the army is to set out. The head and the tail are to line up and set out in a long snake formation. However, if one group is attacked, the other groups do not need to ask for reinforcements. Shi Heng rubbed his dizzy head. His tone was filled with a trace of helplessness and frustration. When his subordinate heard this military order, he asked with a trace of hesitation, "Commander-in-Chief, how should we deal with the injured? Many of them have leg injuries, and I'm afraid that they won't be able to follow the army for a while. They should all stay behind." At the same time, send out a 500-man squad to protect them and send them back to the capital, Shi Heng said, a resolute light in his eyes. This was how it was on the battlefield. Once one was injured and could not move freely, one would become a burden. People like this would naturally be abandoned. After the order was given, the army of 50,000 abandoned nearly 10,000 men and set out for the Tianjin garrison several dozen kilometers away. As Shi Heng's army was setting out, Battalion Commander Nie Tong led 20 squads to follow. Gao Xiong did not follow. Instead, he led the other squads to the 10,000 some wounded soldiers left behind. In Shi Heng's eyes, these wounded Ming soldiers were a burden, but in Ling Feng's eyes, they were treasures. If there was one thing that Crimson City lacked the most, it would be men in their prime. Furthermore, these injured soldiers who could not move freely for a while were highly sought after. In order to quickly subdue these injured Ming soldiers, Gao Xiong finally drew his sword. The elite Cold Vanguard soldiers were all equipped with super-strong combat abilities. The thousands of auxiliary soldiers who had also undergone strict training suddenly surrounded the Ming soldiers like phantoms. Even though they were outnumbered, a single wave of attacks was enough to subdue the 500-man escort. When the advanced firearms were taken out, the wounded Ming soldiers quickly gave in. One of the reasons for this was because they were afraid of firearms, but it was also because they yearned for mercenaries. Many of them had even thought of learning more about mercenaries and joining them. It was just that they did not have the opportunity to do so. Now that the opportunity had appeared, many of them were secretly delighted. They felt that this was an opportunity bestowed by the heavens. When some of the wounded tried to resist, their weapons were snatched away by the other Ming soldiers. According to these people, this was an opportunity that they could not even ask for. Since it had appeared, how could they reject it? The operation of subduing the wounded soldiers went extremely smoothly, out of Gao Xiong's expectations. At this moment, he finally knew that the 6th young master's work in the capital over the past year had not been in vain. While he was happy, he also cautiously gave the order that not a single Ming soldier could be allowed to leave the group. At the very least, the news of the mercenaries appearing here could not be spread. It seemed impossible for 1,000 people to gather nearly 10,000 wounded soldiers. However, with the help of the wounded soldiers of the Ming army who had a good impression of the mercenaries, the operation went unexpectedly smoothly. Chapter 292. As for Shi Heng, when he led the 40,000 troops out of the Langfang and came to the wilderness, he was like a live target, being attacked all the time. Short bows were used when they were close, and long bows were used when they were far away. When he sent a limited number of cavalry to chase after them, the other party ran away faster than a rabbit. Shi Heng's mouth was filled with blisters due to the tactic of, you walk, he disturbs, you stop, he hits, you chase after him. He was really furious, but he didn't have any better ideas. Originally, the army could have covered dozens of kilometers in half a day, but it took more than a day. It was not until the evening of the second day that they arrived at Tianjin Guard. As soon as he entered, the scene he saw made Shi Heng feel like he had been played and cheated. There were still Ming soldiers standing guard at the gate of Tianjin Guard, and the people in the city walked as usual in an orderly manner. How was this even the slightest bit like he was being attacked and trying to rescue someone? Shi Heng, who couldn't figure out what was going on, immediately sent someone to call the Baihu officer who was guarding the city. Only then did he learn that the Japanese samurai had suddenly disappeared 4 days ago. As for where they went, they didn't know. They had also sent a fast horse to the capital to inform about this matter. However, it was obvious that something had happened to the fast horse. Otherwise, it would have run into Governor Shi Heng, who was hurrying over. Ran away. Disappeared. Shi Heng did not think about why he did not encounter a fast horse on his way here. He was now thinking about why the Japanese samurai had disappeared. Could it be that they could really fly into the sky and hide in the ground? Did you search the city? Since he had already entered Tianjin Guard and ensured the safety of this place, his mission could be considered a success. Next, he had to consider how to expand the results of the battle. At least, he had to catch some Japanese samurai, preferably alive, and bring them back to the capital as prisoners of war. In this way, his position in the army would be more stable. No. The Baihu officer guarding the city shook his head with some difficulty. In fact, with the number of troops in his hands, he did not dare to do such a thing. He was naturally happy that the Japanese army did not appear. How could he take the initiative to look for them? Trash. Hearing the official's reply, Shi Heng's face was naturally filled with displeasure. Then, as the commander-in-chief, he gave the order to take over the city's defense. He also requested that starting from the next morning, there should be a large-scale manhunt in the city. He did not believe that the Japanese army would withdraw so completely. There must be some people left behind to inquire about the news. As long as they could catch them, it would be a great achievement. Because of Shi Heng's arrival, the Tianjin Guard became even more chaotic. The people in the city, who had just rested for a few days, found that the reinforcements of the great Ming dynasty had rushed into the people's homes like tigers and wolves. They rushed into the shops on the streets, rushed into the mansions, and rushed into the mansions. Speaking of which, these Ming soldiers had been suppressing a bellyful of anger. Along the way, they were constantly ambushed. Now that they finally had a chance to vent their anger, how could they be courteous? Immediately, they would not let go of any suspicious place in the city. Those who were wrongly arrested filled up the entire prison cell. This naturally caused the people's hearts to be in chaos. The elderly and children were bullied, women were bullied, and adult men were wrongly arrested as spies. It was not uncommon for them to be wrongly arrested. The atmosphere in the city was foul and chaotic. These Ming soldiers had just joined not long ago and had not undergone systematic training. Even in terms of military discipline, their self-discipline was extremely poor. Now, they could openly do some things that they did not dare to do before. It was like a competition to see who could snatch more women, who could bully people better, and who could extort more money. Most of them were sent to Commander-in-Chief Shi Heng. As the general in charge of the army, his subordinates would naturally give him a lot of benefits. Looking at the silver tails that were quickly piled up like a mountain, Shi Heng, who originally wanted to restrain his subordinates, simply shut his mouth. If he wanted the soldiers to work for him, he had to give them benefits. As long as they were obedient and obeyed his orders, he could just turn a blind eye to some small mistakes. After a large-scale search, they really did find something. Some of the Japanese descendants who originally lived here were captured and then treated as spies for the Japanese army. They were tortured, and in the end, they would say whatever you wanted them to say. These real Japanese people who had gone into hiding when the Tianjin garrison was attacked by the so-called Japanese army became scapegoats at this moment. In the end, more than 300 people were captured, and their case files were pushed to Shi Heng. With this harvest, Shi Heng's expression finally improved. Thinking that the emperor was probably waiting for good news in the capital, he personally wrote a letter and wrote down his harvest. For example, on the way from the capital, he had fought dozens of battles with the Japanese army. In the end, he had successfully killed more than 10,000 people and captured more than 300, but his own army had also lost more than 10,000 people. The written battle report, which could also be said to be a request for merit, was quickly sent to the capital by horse. He continued to abuse his power in the Tianjin garrison, waiting for the emperor's reward. Then, he would find a suitable time to return to the capital as a meritorious official. Although the Japanese army had not been found, the silence of the past few days had given Shi Heng the idea that all the enemies had fled. Moreover, he was defending the city this time, so he was not afraid of a small group of enemy sneak attacks. Presumably, there was no chance. These Japanese soldiers, who had problems with food and shelter, should have retreated to the sea. After all, they had come from afar, and without sufficient supplies, they could not stay in a foreign country for too long. In order to allow the Japanese troops to retreat, Shi Heng even intentionally ignored the defensive line at the port outside the city. He only sent less than 100 Ming soldiers there and ordered that once the Japanese troops appeared, they were not to fight them head-on, but to retreat. They only needed to watch from afar and report back what happened. On the second night after Shi Heng entered the Tianjin garrison, the Japanese army really did appear. It was impossible to hide their vast army, and they were discovered the moment they appeared. The 100 Ming soldiers were extremely obedient and quickly withdrew. They watched as more than 10,000 people entered the harbor and then left on ships that had appeared at some point. When Shi Heng learned that the Japanese army had retreated, he was naturally overjoyed. Although the process of this battle was difficult and complicated, so much so that he didn't really manage to eliminate the enemy once from the beginning to the end, the result was good. Their army retreated, and his mission could be considered completed. He could finally report to the emperor. Full of joy, Shi Heng immediately had someone write a report of the victory. He wanted to tell the emperor and the officials in the court the good news as soon as possible. At the same time, he wanted to take this opportunity to publicize his achievements and take advantage of the opportunity to obtain some benefits. In the Great Ming, the Loyalty Guild was not the only one who fought. Shi Heng could also do the same. Then, he sent out soldiers to take the more than 300 real Japanese people who were stationed in the Great Ming dynasty in prison wagons, and then 1,000 soldiers marched back to the capital. According to Shi Heng's intention, everywhere he went, he had to announce it with great fanfare, as if he was afraid that others would not know what he had done. The report of the victory was sent in advance. Without Gao Xiong stopping it, the road was smooth. In just one night, the news reached the capital. When Zhu Qiyu, the emperor in the imperial palace, heard the news, he was naturally overjoyed and applauded. This time, Shi Heng had defeated the Japanese army. The significance of this was not as simple as winning a battle. More importantly, through this battle, as the emperor, he had also gained a reputation for being able to recognize people and use them well. This greatly stabilized his position as the emperor, and it also greatly weakened the influence of the loyalty duke in the military and in the hearts of the people. If one day, he stabilized everything, he would not have so many concerns when he wanted to take action against the meritorious officials. After the officials heard the news, they were both happy and sad. Naturally, those who were happy were those who supported the emperor and those who were on good terms with Shi Heng. It had been like this for generations. Only when the military was stabilized, other things could be done easily. Only then would they have the confidence to do things and be able to do better. There were not many officials who were sad, only a few. For example, the Minister of Rights, Hu Cheng, the left assistant minister, He Wenyuan, the Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhi, and the left assistant minister of Justice, Su Yozhen. They were either openly or inwardly on Yang Qindong's side. Originally, they thought that the naval invasion of the Japanese army would not be so easy to solve. In the end, they would even need the loyalty duke to come forward. But now, Shi Heng had been captured so easily. In this case, Yang Qindong's influence would be greatly weakened. Even when they wanted to take action against this person in the future, they would have fewer concerns. Yang Qindong did nothing. After defeating Wala, he handed over all his military power and stayed in the Yang family manor, teaching and educating people. He rarely came to the capital. But his influence in the military and in the hearts of the people had always been great. The name of the god of war was well known throughout Qianlong. It seemed that as long as he took action, there was nothing that could not be solved. Now that there was a substitute, it was no wonder that those who cared about him were so anxious. In contrast to the worries of others, Yang Qindong was much calmer. Even when he heard the news from Shi Heng, his expression remained the same. He stood in the room in the main hall and watched Hu Yan, Qiao Yin, Lady Xiang, and seventh sister play mahjong. The immortal abode still had many programs to arrange. Lady Shui remained there, and seventh sister, Yang Duo, took her place. Even if seventh sister did not come out as a substitute, there were still backup players. For example, Junko. Even though there were enough people, she still sat obediently to the side. From time to time, she would pour tea and water for everyone, appearing very obedient. Chapter 293. Ever since Shi Heng and the others came to the Yang village to ask for her and were rejected by Yang Qindong, Junko recognized one fact. In the following days, unless she could return to Japan safely, she must be protected by Yang Qindong. This fact immediately changed Junko's mentality. Her original idea of talking to him as an equal had long been thrown out of her mind. Now, she seemed to have become a sensible maid, giving people the feeling that she was very well behaved. Junko showed this obedient side of her very well. She often left her shadow in the places where Yang Qindong appeared most often. By doing so, not only could he please Yang Qindong, but he could also please the madams. During these days in the Yang village, Junko could see that there were not many people who could influence the East Marshal, but the wives seemed to be able to do it. Therefore, she completely put down her pride and tried her best to please him. Junko was young and very beautiful. Yang Qindong seemed to take good care of her in the past. On this point, the first wife, Hu Yan, and the second wife, Qiao Yin, had already communicated with each other. Marrying Yang Qindong was tantamount to falling into a nest of happiness. This was not only reflected in the aspects of food and clothing, but also in the way of thinking. For example, after marrying Yang Qindong, she didn't have to be like other women who didn't go out of the house when they had nothing to do. Usually, she would just stay in her small courtyard and wait to take care of her husband and teach her children. This way of doing things, who knew how many talented women's aspirations had been destroyed because of it, eventually making them mediocre and ordinary. This might also be a kind of sorrow for women in a male-dominated society. They were destined to be men's accessories and dependents. Most of them looked like they didn't know how to live without their husbands. All of this, in Yang Qindong's eyes, was completely different. Even if you become Madame Yang, it won't stop you from doing other things. On the contrary, as long as one was willing, one could get 100% support in whatever one did. Even if one wanted to go out to play or spend money, no one would stop them, and no one would say anything. There was also no supervision and questioning from the in-laws. In modern terms, this was the absolute liberal party. No one would say what one should or should not do after marriage. No one would interfere with one's freedom. No one would even ask when one wanted to have a child. Even now, this was what many women hoped for in their hearts. After all, people liked freedom. Wouldn't it be better to play and see more while one was still young? Speaking of children, none of the 4 wives had gotten pregnant so far. This was also deliberately done by Yang Qindong. Including Hu Yan, she was now less than 20 years old. She was definitely a young girl in today's society. Yang Qindong admitted that it was too early to have a child at such a young age. He remembered that he once accidentally read a book that said that the best age for women to give birth was 22 to 27 years old. Even if it was for the health of his wives, he decided to wait. Yang Qindong gave his wives enough freedom and care. In return, they would naturally think of their husbands. Take Junko's matter for example. After Hu Yan and Xiao Yin discussed it, they decided to help the two of them. They could see that there were feelings between the two of them. Of course, no woman was willing to share the man she liked with others. It was just that in the society at that time, it was normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Some even had many mistresses outside. Because of this, families were not harmonious. There were even many people who caused trouble for Xiao Chang. However, these did not seem to be a problem in Yang Qindong's eyes. Because he had enough ability to care for each of his wives. This ability did not only refer to financial resources and power, but also to his body. At night, he was full of energy. Sometimes, Hu Yan and the other 3 women could not handle him. This might have something to do with his modern brain and ancient body. In this regard, sometimes Yang Qindong wondered if he had gone through something unknown that caused his body to mutate. Was that why he was so strong? Naturally. There was no man who did not want to be strong in this aspect. All in all, the result was good. Since Yang Qindong couldn't find the reason, he didn't probe any further. It was precisely because Yang Qindong was too perfect in all aspects that Hu Yan and Xiao Yin decided to pull Junko in as a sister after discussing it. It was just that there were some things that could not be said directly. Otherwise, it would be easy to overreach. This was why they took things slowly. First, they allowed Junko to enter the main hall and watch them play mahjong. It was an opportunity to slowly integrate into the group. Junko was given this opportunity, so naturally, she would cherish it. It was also after entering this place that she saw more deeply that Yang Qindong was different. His care for his wives and his 7th sister made him more tender in Junko's heart. Junko even had thoughts that being able to marry Yang Qindong was not a bad thing. It seemed that he was very good to his wives and did not have any intention of treating them differently. Several times, she saw the 2nd wife, Xiao Yin, and the 1st wife, Hu Yan, playing with each other. Just this scene alone was something that would never happen in the other great clans. It was because she slowly integrated that her impression of Yang Qindong became better and better. Junko believed that men should be like this. They should have an iron-blooded side, but they should also have a tender side. They should be decisive in doing things, but also have enough patience to get along with their loved ones. In these aspects, it seemed that Yang Qindong did very well and was impeccable. The mahjong game was still going on, but a few people were still thinking about it. At this moment, Tiger's mane quietly came in and cast a look at Yang Qindong, indicating that there was news. Let's talk here, there are no outsiders. Yang Qindong saw that Tiger's mane had finally appeared, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, revealing a smile that no one knew. Even his eyes, intentionally or unintentionally, swept over Junko, who was sitting there with a heavy heart. The young master asked him to talk, so it was not a shameful thing. After a little hesitation, Tiger's mane bowed his head and respectfully said, "Young master, there is a battle report from the front. Commander Shiheng led the army to defeat the Japanese army and has driven them back to the sea." Pa! A fruit plate full of melon seeds and peanuts suddenly fell to the ground. Needless to say, all of this was naturally Junko's masterpiece. As the princess of the Japanese imperial family, she was naturally more concerned about the situation in the front than other people. Now that she knew the truth, how could she not panic? The fruit plate that suddenly fell to the ground happened to be at Hu Yan's feet. Almost without hesitation, she bent down to help clean up. While cleaning up, she said to Yang Qindong, "Rokaru, you know that we are playing mahjong here, but you still want to ruin our fun. Let's talk about business in the study." "Madam's order, I have to obey. Yang Qindong smiled and joked, and then strode away. From beginning to end, he did not look at Junko, as if the gaffe just now did not happen. In the main hall, Junko was absent-mindedly cleaning up the mess on the ground. The comforting voices of Hu Yan and the other women sounded, and even the seventh sister, Yang Duo, said that the war was originally a man's business, and they did not need to worry so much. The women did not know Junko's identity, so it was not wrong to say so. For this reason, Junko kept thanking them, but in her heart, she wondered if the defeat of the Japanese army had any impact on her father. What could she do? Although she did not know about the dispatch of troops this time, as the Princess of Japan, of course, she still hoped that her country could win. In the study, Tiger's man talked about the details of the investigation by the Security Bureau, and even the reactions of some courtiers. For example, the deputy censor of the censorate, Dong Chunhua, even let people set off firecrackers at home, and the commander of the Genie Guard, Lu Gui, called a large group of subordinates to book a restaurant to celebrate. Don't worry about that, some people always like to be sad after joy. For these things, Yang Qindong casually waved and put it aside. Then, after a few breaths, he said, in this way, arrange for Yang Bao to immediately print the news and spread the news of Shi Heng's victory, so that the people in the place where Yang Bao is present will know about it. Yang Bao. Spread the news. At this moment, Tiger's man stared with a puzzled face. He really couldn't figure out why the young master wanted to cheer for Shi Heng. Hee, if you want a person to fall hard enough, then you have to raise him high enough, right? Yang Qindong's voice sounded like he was explaining, but it also sounded like he was giving advice. Oh, raise him to death. I understand, young master. Tiger's man was suddenly enlightened. As one of the most trusted people of Yang Qindong, he knew that the ones who really left at sea were not Gao Xiong's main force, but more than 10,000 captured Ming dynasty troops. In other words, Gao Xiong and the others hadn't left. They had just created an illusion. However, in the joy of victory, or perhaps it could be said that Shi Heng, who urgently needed a victory, and even Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, who also needed a victory, seemed to have overlooked those wounded soldiers. Since the other side had exposed a flaw, Yang Qindong would not let it go and spread the news of the victory. If the final result was not like this, then the slap in the face would be loud enough. At that time, whether it was Shi Heng or Dai Zong, their expressions would be very interesting. More than 10,000 wounded soldiers suddenly disappeared. In the face of the news of the victory, people took the initiative to ignore it. But the truth was the truth, and it would not happen just because you did not want to see it. The Minister of War, Yi Ming, hurried into the depths of the royal palace at the end of court the next day and saw Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, whose face was still covered in joy. Chapter 294. May your Majesty live for 10,000 years. After kneeling on the ground, Yi Ming handed over a memorial that his subordinate had just handed to him. From start to finish, he didn't dare to raise his head to look at the emperor's expression. Official Yi, why do you have to be so courteous? Quickly rise. Zhu Qiyu was in a good mood, so his attitude toward Yi Ming was much more amiable than usual. But when he saw Yi Ming kneel on the ground, he was still shocked. The Ming dynasty was particular about ruling the world together with the scholar officials. Unless one was guilty, there was no need to kneel when meeting alone. Chief eunuch Jining, who had also sensed that the atmosphere was not right, walked down the steps and took the memorial that Yi Ming had handed over to Zhu Qiyu. After receiving the memorial, Zhu Qiyu's expression changed a little. I wonder what memorial this is to make official Yi so anxious. As if to encourage himself, the memorial was opened. Then, he saw the young emperor's expression change greatly. The memorial wrote that the 10,000 wounded soldiers of the Ming dynasty who should have returned to the capital the day before yesterday had suddenly disappeared. They had all been injured on their way from the capital to the Tianjin Guard. Originally, they had been ordered by Commander-in-Chief Shi Heng to return to the capital from outside Langfang City. But there had been no news of them even now. In order to confirm this news, the Ministry of War had already sent out 5 groups of scouts on fast horses to search, but there was still no news. They wrote a memorial and sent it to Yi Ming. After Yi Ming received this conclusion, he didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly entered the palace to see the emperor. At this time, his head was very low. He knew very well what this meant, how terrible the situation was, and how serious his dereliction of duty was. How could he dare to raise his head to look into Zhu Qiyu's eyes? Clap! The memorial flew down from the throne room and hit Yi Ming's head. Then, Zhu Qiyu's roar rang out, "What the hell is going on here? 10,000 wounded soldiers, even 10,000 pigs can't have no news, right? Give us an explanation." Zhu Qiyu's temper had always been good, and he rarely lost his composure in front of his subjects. But now, he had no choice but to get angry. If the memorial was true, then not only had the Japanese army not disappeared, it was even approaching the capital. In other words, a second battle to defend the capital was about to begin. Her head was extremely low as she cursed Shiheng from head to toe in her heart. If it wasn't for this person's desire for grandiose achievements, the Ministry of War wouldn't have been so careless. Now, nearly 10,000 wounded soldiers had disappeared into thin air, and the blame had fallen entirely on the Ministry of War, and on his head. Listening to the emperor's questions, Yi Ming wanted to raise his head several times to say something, but in the end, he didn't open his mouth. There was no way for him to explain such a thing. If he tried to explain himself, it would only make the emperor even angrier. Search. Send everyone out. You must find these wounded soldiers. In addition, inform the military office of the 5 cities to increase the defense of the capital's gates to prevent any accidents. Zhu Qiyu closed his eyes as he spoke. He had a bad feeling. The so-called victory of Shiheng might not be so real, and he might have been fooled. As if he had been pardoned, Yi Ming repeatedly agreed and then crawled out of the hall. After he left the palace, the entire scout camp of the Ministry of War became busy. All the scouts who were still at home, and those who could still move, were sent out without exception. Not only the Ministry of War, but Yi Ming also ordered Jining to ask the embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern faction guards to go out and search. These people were the best at finding clues from the smallest of clues. Immediately, the Ministry of War, the Eastern faction guards, and the embroidered uniform guards all began to work. With the cooperation of the 3 parties, they soon made a new discovery in the afternoon. In a low-lying area beside the official road from the capital to Langfang, hundreds of burned corpses of Ming soldiers were found. After confirming that they were Shiheng's subordinates, they had escorted more than 300 Japanese prisoners of war back to the capital to be presented. Unexpectedly, a portion of them had died here. Needless to say, this was done by Yang Qindong's men. His goal this time was not only to create a tense atmosphere before the war, but also to stabilize his position and influence. At the same time, he wanted to use this opportunity to provoke a war between the Great Ming and Japan. Given the Great Ming's usual behavior and the influence of their belief in Confucianism, it was more difficult than ascending to the heavens to get them to take the initiative to go to war. Yang Qindong's ambition was to let all the Han people in the world stand at the peak of the world, to let all the Han people in the world receive the greatest respect and dignity. Naturally, Japan, which was very close to him, had long been included in his plans. However, he did not know how long it would take for the cold front to take shape and have enough people and a huge fighting force. Yang Qindong, who always had the mindset of seizing every minute, thought of this method. First, he would test the Japanese and see how strong they were. At the same time, he would weaken their strength and lay a solid foundation for his future conquest. In order to achieve this goal, a group of the 300 Japanese merchants and people in the Great Ming had to be released and let them return to Japan to spread the news. Naturally, these people would not be allowed to return to the Great Ming capital as prisoners of war. This was the reason for the Battle of Robbery. Originally, he wanted to win this battle without bloodshed. At most, he would let some of the Ming soldiers suffer some light injuries and temporarily lose the ability to fight. But to his surprise, the Ming soldiers in charge of escorting the prisoners were Shi Heng's personal guards. They had actually dared to resist with all their might. Left with no other choice, Gao Xiong decided to kill them and deal with these stubborn soldiers. In the face of modern firearms, these so-called elites and personal guards were no different from paper. After cleaning up the battlefield, Gao Xiong stuffed a bow and arrow into the bullet holes in his body. Still unwilling to give up, he lit a fire to destroy the corpses. After that, Gao Xiong ordered his men to send the Japanese people to the sea. He also told them that it was the mercenaries who helped them this time. Gao Xiong would not let go of this opportunity to express his goodwill. This way, it would be much easier for him to accept Japanese warships in the future. Once this scene was discovered, the news quickly spread back to the capital. At this moment, because of Yang Bao, the ordinary people in the capital also knew that Commander-in-Chief Shi Heng had won a great victory. They were all excitedly discussing it, and their faces were filled with joy. Suddenly, the 12 gates of the capital were closed in advance, and it was announced that Japanese spies had entered the capital and needed to be rounded up. But there was no large-scale roundup. Instead, many great Ming soldiers appeared below the city walls, and the soldiers of the 5 cities' warden's office could be seen everywhere on the streets of the capital. The atmosphere in the capital suddenly became tense. This was all because of Zhu Qiyu's imperial decree. After learning that the Japanese prisoners of war had really been taken away, Zhu Qiyu, who had been worried ever since he became emperor, ordered the defense of the capital to be tightened. At the same time, he ordered horses to leave the city and informed Shi Heng that once the situation in the Tianjin garrison was stabilized, he should return to the capital to take charge of the situation. Shi Heng was the commander-in-chief of the army and was in charge of military affairs. He could be considered a veteran of the battlefield. Without him, Zhu Qiyu truly could not rest easy. The horses galloped through the night and arrived at the Tianjin garrison early the next morning. At this time, Shi Heng's army was preparing breakfast, and it was not yet time to open fire. The commander-in-chief saw the messenger sent by the Bureau of Military Personnel. What? There are still remnants of the Japanese army? They might endanger the safety of the capital. Shi Heng had just put on a jacket and entered the main hall when he heard this shocking news. Yes, Venerable Commander-in-Chief. This is His Majesty's decree. The messenger nodded and took out an imperial decree from his bosom and respectfully presented it to Shi Heng. This was not an imperial decree, but it was a letter written by Zhu Qiyu himself. On it was written that the capital was in danger and that the commander-in-chief should urgently return to the capital to take charge of the defense of the city. The urgency in the tone and sincerity in the words had already molded Shi Heng into a pillar of the country. As Shi Heng read this secret letter from one of the emperor's trusted aides, his heart trembled with excitement. This was the emperor's trust and reliance. He had made a few mistakes, but the emperor had not blamed him and had even spoken with such sincerity. How could he not do his utmost? Since this was the case, there was nothing more to say. He naturally had to return to the capital. As for the defense of the Tianjin garrison, let alone the fact that it seemed stable, even if it was still unstable, he couldn't care less. What could be more important than the emperor's trust? Right now, he wanted nothing more than to grow a pair of wings and fly back. In his urgent mood, Shi Heng ordered the army to quickly eat breakfast. An hour later, the army was to assemble. 2,000 men were to remain in the Tianjin garrison while the rest of the army was to return to the capital to rescue the emperor. Before breakfast was even ready, the order had already been given. The cooks hastily increased their firepower and managed to finish the food. Even so, many of the soldiers still hadn't eaten their fill. After just 2 bites, they set off for the Tianjin garrison, heading straight for the capital. Shi Heng was impatient. He wanted to use this matter to demonstrate his loyalty so that he could obtain the emperor's trust. However, he had neglected one thing, and that was his safety along the way. In other words, the 10,000-some Japanese army that had left the Tianjin harbor had caused Shi Heng to let down his guard. He believed that even if there were any remaining enemies, there wouldn't be too many. As a result, he had only been concerned with the speed of the army and had neglected the proper formation and defense. In order to show Zhu Qiyu his loyalty, Shi Heng had led his 3,000 cavalry ahead of the rest of the army, leaving them far behind as they headed straight for the capital. He was still thinking about how happy the emperor would be when he received the report of the battle early in the morning and was able to enter the capital in the afternoon. Everything he had done would have been worth it. Chapter 295. Shi Heng, who was supposed to be in the center of the army, had become the general of the vanguard. He had repeatedly ordered the infantry to keep up with him, making it difficult for the 30,000 ordinary soldiers. Without horses to ride, how could 2 legs be a match for 4 legs? As a result, the distance between the two sides grew larger and larger. Not only that, but the infantry had also grown longer and longer. Some soldiers had almost reached the corridor while others had just walked out of the Tianjin Guard. This long line of soldiers had far too many weaknesses, so many that Gao Xiong was able to quickly find several massive openings. Now that there was a loophole, it was equivalent to giving the enemy an opportunity. Gao Xiong didn't hold back anymore. Commander Gao, who had already reorganized the army, led the cold front and the auxiliary troops down from the sky. It was as if he had smacked the Ming army's head with a club. At the gates of the capital, the tense-faced Minister of War Yi Ming, head eunuch Chen Guan of the Imperial Horse Directorate, and supervising eunuch Ru Zhu were standing on the city gates, their eyes anxiously looking into the distance. Finally, the dust began to rise, and the distant cavalry could be vaguely seen. "They're here, they're here." When Yi Ming saw the cavalry bearing the banner of the Great Ming Dynasty appear, his expression relaxed, and his entire body went limp. After an anxious night of waiting, Shi Heng's return finally came. Now, he could finally let go of the burden in his heart. Even if there were any more dangerous situations, there would be someone powerful to take care of it. The 3,000 cavalry led by Shi Heng had truly arrived. Because they had charged at the very front, they had not been harassed, allowing them to safely arrive at the gates of the capital. His arrival was warmly received by the group led by Yi Ming. "Where is His Majesty? What's the situation in the capital?" Shi Heng anxiously asked Yi Ming and the others after dismounting from his horse. Yi Ming could naturally understand Shi Heng's impatience, so he put on an understanding expression and said, "Governor Shi, His Majesty is waiting for you in the palace. Come with me as quickly as possible." The Zhanghe Hall of the Imperial Palace. This was one of the 3 main halls of the Forbidden City and the smallest of the 3 halls of the outer court. It was located behind the Taihe Hall. The Zhanghe Hall was where the emperor rested and practiced etiquette before going to the Taihe Hall to hold the ceremony. This was the emperor's private place. Being able to receive Shi Heng here was enough to show how much he valued him. As soon as he entered the Hall of Harmony, Shi Heng dropped to his knees with a thud and shouted respectfully, "Long live the emperor! You may rise." Zhu Qiyu's face was full of joy. To be able to rush back so quickly from the Tianjin Guard, Shi Heng's loyalty was evident. With such a loyal minister and a good general, as the emperor, he was able to comfort himself. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Shi Heng stood up. When he raised his head to look at Zhu Qiyu, his eyes were full of concern and self-blame. As if seeing the meaning in Shi Heng's eyes, Zhu Qiyu waved his hand and said, "It's fine. We are fine, the capital is fine, and the officials are fine. Now that you're back, everything is even better." Ha ha ha. A hearty and self-satisfied laughter resounded throughout the entire Hall of Harmony. Following this laughter, a series of hurried footsteps could be heard. Looking toward the sound, it was the head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, Chen Guan. As one of the heads of the eunuchs in charge of military affairs, there was rarely good news wherever Chen Guan appeared. With Chen Guan's appearance, the smile on Zhu Qiyu's face gradually disappeared. The bad feeling in his heart grew stronger. "Your Majesty, there's an urgent report from the front line." Yang Village. In the study of the inner village, Tiger's Mane delivered a report he had just received to Yang Qindong. After opening it, Dong Shuai's laughter rang out. Not bad, not bad. In this battle, Gao Xiong captured more than 15,000 Ming soldiers. In total, this Shi Heng has already given us half of the captives. He really is the commander-in-chief of transportation. Tiger's Mane didn't understand what a commander-in-chief of transportation was, but he was clear on one thing. That was, the front line had won another battle. Immediately, he said happily, that's right. This time, we've captured so many young soldiers. I'm sure the Cold Front's team will be expanded. Expansion is good. But we must pay attention to the quality of the soldiers. How about this, send an order to Qiqian City and let the instructors there pay attention to increasing the loyalty of the soldiers. Also, the Cold Front's assessment cannot be the slightest bit careless. It's better to have nothing than to have something substandard. The use of the phrase, it's better to have nothing than to have something substandard, was enough to show the high standards and strict requirements that Yang Qindong had for the Cold Front. In Yang Qindong's heart, the Cold Front had always been the most elite. He wanted to use this army to conquer the world. Since this was the case, they couldn't have too many soldiers. Otherwise, it would be difficult to provide for them even if they had great financial resources. This required them to be few but good. This way, they could use the least amount of effort to leverage the greatest benefits. In reality, ever since the Cold Front had been established, it had never disappointed Yang Qindong. Just like this time, when they disguised themselves as Japanese soldiers, Gao Xiong had clearly written in the report that the Cold Front had no casualties. Only 20 or so auxiliary soldiers had died and 300 or so were injured. With less than 400 casualties, they were able to capture more than 25,000 Ming soldiers and take away more than 20,000 civilians near the Tiananwei port. Naturally, part of this was due to Shi Heng taking credit for himself and Zhu Qiyu's careless command. However, Ling Feng's own strength also played an important role. It was because they were the leaders and the core that they were able to achieve victory. This was the meaning of being an elite. On the other hand, if the Cold Front was mixed with sand and couldn't become the elite of the elite, how could they achieve great things? Therefore, the phrase, it's better to have nothing than to have something substandard, was extremely appropriate. Tiger's Mane, who had always regarded the sixth young master's words as the truth, immediately agreed and went out to spread the news. After Yang Qindong was left alone in the study, he slowly sat down on a chair. Then, his gaze fell on the map on the wall. It was the location of Japan. Through his gaze, he seemed to have slowly penetrated the map. Not long after, he could see the inspiring scene of a bright five-starred red flag being placed there. In the palace, Chen Guan knelt on the ground and reported that the army was attacked when they returned to the capital and suffered heavy losses. Shi Heng, who was originally excited and waiting to hear the emperor's praise, knelt on the ground with a thud. Then, with a trembling voice, he said, "This subject is guilty, this subject is guilty." He led 30,000 soldiers and lost half of them on the way back. This was indeed a serious crime. If it was any other emperor, he would have been sent to prison. Naturally, Zhu Qiyu was also very angry. However, he knew that Shi Heng couldn't be moved at the moment. Without a general at his disposal, if this person committed a crime, he would face a situation where there would be no general at his disposal in the event of a crisis. Forget it. Governor Shi was just anxious to save the emperor. Zhu Qiyu was very dissatisfied and then spat out these words. He didn't mention his beloved subject, but directly said that Governor Shi had seen Zhu Qiyu's dissatisfaction. How could Shi Heng not hear it clearly? He knew that he had committed a grave mistake. At once, he kowtowed to the ground again and said, "Your Majesty, this subject requests to atone for his crime by performing meritorious deeds. This subject will definitely find the main force of the Japanese army and fight them to the death. We will rescue the prisoners and show the great Ming dynasty's courage." "Good, since that is the case, I will allow you to atone for your crime and perform meritorious deeds. I hope that this time, you can bring me good news. Go. Zhu Qiyu, who was somewhat disheartened and disappointed, forced himself to be spirited and said. However, he was actually very depressed. Why was it that after he became the emperor, things kept happening one after another? Moreover, there was nothing that went his way. This time, the new army had suffered such heavy losses. He was afraid that it would take some time for them to recover, right? What if he hadn't chosen Shi Heng to be the general and had instead chosen Yang Qindong to be the commander-in-chief? Would there have been a different ending? However, just as he thought of this, Zhu Qiyu shook his head and rejected the idea. Yang Qindong's thoughts were difficult to deal with. No matter what, he couldn't give too much power to a subject that he couldn't completely trust. Otherwise, he would be unable to eat or sleep in peace. If that really happened, he would be reaping what he had sown. Shi Heng left the palace and searched for the whereabouts of the main force of the Japanese army with Minister of War Yi Ming and Imperial Horse Directorate head eunuch Chen Guan. However, before they could investigate anything, news came from the Tianjin Ministry of Defense. It said that a large number of Japanese troops had suddenly entered the Tianjin port and left by boat. A rough estimate put the number of troops at around 30 to 40,000. Where did so many Japanese troops come from? After hearing the news, Minister Yi Ming's face was filled with shock. He didn't think that those people were actually his own soldiers who had been captured. However, the shock only flashed across Shi Heng's face for a moment. Then, he said excitedly, "Good, so many enemies have left. This time, there shouldn't be many Japanese troops left in our great Ming dynasty. I suggest that we immediately send people to secretly investigate their whereabouts. Once they are found, the army will surround and suppress them. No matter what, they can't be allowed to cause any more trouble." Agreed. Minister of War Yi Ming and Imperial Horse Directorate head eunuch Chen Guan both nodded in agreement. After the three of them reached a consensus, the secret agents in the army, the spies from the Ministry of War, and the experts from the Eastern Faction Guards and the embroidered uniform guards all quietly left the city and began to search for traces of the Japanese army. However, at this moment, Gao Xiong had already left with the main force and the captives through the Tianjin port. However, Nie Tong's figure was no longer on the boat. He was left behind, along with 2 companies of Cold Front's elites. They were following the 6th young master's orders and continuing to stir up trouble in the Great Ming dynasty. In short, they couldn't let Shi Heng and the others rest, and they definitely couldn't give them enough time or opportunity to train a new army. Moreover, as long as there was an external threat, no one would pay attention to them. If there was a critical moment, Nie Tong could still lead the 200 Cold Front elites into the capital to ensure the safety of the 6th young master. Chapter 296. It was precisely because Nie Tong had left the Cold Front with only 200 elites in the area between Tientsin and the capital that they were so capable and vigilant that it was very difficult for anyone to discover their whereabouts. Even if a few lucky spies ran into them, they would be immediately detained and would have no chance to send out any information. In order to achieve the goal of harming the capital, Nie Tong would occasionally bring people out to flaunt their might. For example, they would rob a passing official's caravan or rob a few officials returning to the capital. This caused the entire region to be jittery and the officials and nobles to complain. Batch after batch of spies and even cavalry were sent out, greatly affecting Shi Heng's energy and making it impossible for him to fully devote himself to the matter of forming and training a new army. As a result, before Yang Qindong ordered Nie Tong to stop, the Great Ming military had a lot of energy tied up in this area. The matter of the Japanese army entering the capital caused a lot of discussion among the common people. First, there was Yang Bao's unbridled report. The news of the Great Ming army's great victory was first spread out, but then there was the news of the Great Ming army losing soldiers and generals. This clear contrast between before and after, the result of giving hope and then disappointing, caused the common people to curse. If there wasn't any good news from the start, the common people wouldn't have such a big opinion. After all, if there was no hope, there would naturally be no disappointment. But now, the incompetence of the army was vividly displayed, so it was no wonder that the common people would have opinions. And the direct result of this opinion was that there were fewer and fewer able-bodied men volunteering to join the army. As a result, there was a serious shortage of soldiers in the later period. The Ministry of War had no choice but to issue official documents and begin to actively recruit soldiers. Anyone who had a strong laborer in their family would be conscripted. This kind of forceful recruitment of able-bodied men naturally caused a lot of chaos. On the streets, one could see able-bodied men being forcibly taken away. For a moment, the entire capital was shrouded in dark clouds. Because of this matter, countless imperial censors wrote to impeach the Ministry of War, believing that their actions had affected the development and stability of society. The memorial was sent to Emperor Zhu Qiyu's desk, leaving the young emperor somewhat helpless. Since he came to power, the great Ming dynasty was no longer as strong as it used to be. After successive defeats, the hereditary military families were unable to provide fresh blood in a short period of time. It was inevitable that ordinary people would be recruited into the army. Fortunately, with Yang Qindong's reputation as the god of war, many people signed up to join the army. Many of the ambitious scholars also threw away their brushes and joined the army. The situation seemed to be good, but after Shi Heng's defeat this time, only half of the 50,000 men he had brought out of the city returned. For this reason, many clans had been shattered, and many families had to send off their black hair. In the capital, 1 or 2 of the 100 households had white cloth hanging from their robes. Such a tragic scene naturally caused the enthusiasm of the soldiers to decrease greatly. In order to ensure the stability of the soldiers, and to ensure the safety of the capital and the imperial power, the people below could not recruit by force. Zhu Qiyu was very clear about this matter. Shi Heng had even specially reported this matter to the Minister of War, Yi Ming, and mentioned some of the subsequent plans, some of which were to his liking. As a result, Zhu Qiyu naturally ignored the memorials from the imperial censors and threw them all to the side. The incident of the Japanese army had caused the situation in the capital to become turbulent, and the people were divided. Yang Qindong had played this move brilliantly. While the people in the capital were talking about it and mourning, the Duke of Loyalty had set his eyes on the southern part of the great Ming dynasty, Guangdong. Based on the knowledge obtained from the history books, the chaos in Guangdong was brewing. The Security Bureau had already sent people there, and the news they sent back was that the king of Shunping was preparing for an uprising. This was one of Yang Qindong's advantages. He was able to know what historical event was going to happen in advance. Fortunately, the heavens were not unkind to him, and many things did not change. Since he knew about this news in advance, he should have made preparations. This was an opportunity for him. The streets of the capital had been in chaos recently. For the sake of the soldiers, the Ministry of War and the military office of the 5 cities did not have any leaders. All the young men of the right age and without any family resources were targeted. They were often taken away on the street and sent to the barracks. More and more people were crying out for justice in front of the Supreme Court. They were all women who had lost their sons and husbands. However, no matter how miserable the situation was, it was difficult to change the fact that the men and their families were taken away. There were policies at the top and countermeasures at the bottom. More and more people chose to hide. They either hid the men in their families, and every day the women would come out to buy rice and noodles, or they thought of ways to send the men out of the city to prevent the soldiers from breaking in at any time. In this way, it also helped some influential people with power and background. There was a need for strong male servants to guard the courtyard, and there was a need for strong male servants to work in the business. In the past, these jobs that didn't pay much were usually done by people over the age of 30. But now, they had all become popular goods. Even if the pay was very little, there would still be many people who would fill the gap. The Ming dynasty's corruption was evident from this. In the Great Ming Dynasty, there were always some people who had special privileges. For example, there were noble young masters who came from good families, or there were merchants who relied on powerful families and had good family resources, or there were scholars who passed the county-level examinations. Often, these people were either rich or famous, and the soldiers were not willing to offend them. It was precisely because of their status that they naturally became a privileged class. This conscription event had also allowed them to obtain countless benefits. Soon, there was even a special business, which was to escort those strong men out of the capital. As a reward, each person received a huge sum of money. It was not that some ordinary families with no money or power did not give them a chance. They would send the men out and sell the women. After signing a contract of 5 or 10 years, they would be able to ensure that the men in the family could safely leave the city. In this background where men were superior to women, men were like the heavens. It seemed that as long as they existed, the family would still exist, and it would be filled with hope. As a result, more and more women sold themselves. There were even some who directly sold their daughters, regardless of how naive they were. They should have been at a carefree age. This chaotic scene made the lives of the people of the capital extremely cheap for a time. Even ordinary households who couldn't afford to buy a servant girl could buy one or two at a low price, so that they could enjoy being the master of the household and take on the airs of a master. Outside the Yang family manor, a carriage drove back, followed by a squad of mercenaries wearing camouflage uniforms. But compared to before, there were a few girls who were only 12 or 13 years old or younger in the group. They all had tears in their eyes, and their faces were full of grievances and reluctance, as if they had just experienced some hardships. Even their eyes were less lively and more lethargic. "Hello, Madame Shui." Leng Feng, who was guarding the outer courtyard of the Yang family manor, saw that the third madam had returned and hurriedly saluted. Then he looked curiously at the 6 or 7 little girls in the group, puzzled and puzzled. Soon, the carriage arrived at the inner courtyard. As soon as the carriage stopped, Xiao Yuxue, who was dressed in snow white, hurried out of the carriage and asked Leng Feng, who was guarding here, "Where are the first madam and the second madam?" "Third madam, they are watching fish in the backyard," Leng Feng replied in a respectful tone. As soon as he finished speaking, Madame Shui floated past him like a gust of wind. It seemed that she knew some kind of lightness skill that allowed her to fly on water. In the pond in the backyard, bright red koi fish were swimming at the bottom of the pond. Their every move could be seen through the clear water of the pond. When 2 koi fish met, they would make a small splash, which made Hu Yan and Xiao Yin, who were watching from the side, exclaim in joy. Spring was about to pass, and summer was coming. The weather was gradually getting hotter. Yang Qindong ordered some people to catch some koi fish in the pond for the madams to enjoy. Unlike Madame Shui and Madame Xiang, Hu Yan and Xiao Yin had not found what they wanted to do until now. Usually, they took turns to take care of the household. Occasionally, Hu Yan would give lessons to the servants in the manor, teaching them how to read and write. After all, she was Hu Zhao's granddaughter, so she was quite knowledgeable. However, the manor was not very big, and there were not many people. Even if she taught them something, it would not take too long. As for taking care of people, there were rules, and everyone was very self-disciplined, so there was really nothing to teach them. As for career, it was not as if the 2 women had not discussed this issue. Second Madame Qiao Yin had also thought about it. Since childhood, she was used to following the 6th young master. As long as she could stay by his side, she did not have any other skills. Taking care of the young master's basic necessities of life was enough. Originally, Hu Yan also wanted to talk about the matter of taking care of the household. However, after a long time of contact, her relationship with Qiao Yin was very good. In addition, this woman never fought for anything, so as the first madam, she naturally could not talk about the matter of taking care of the household. Later, she thought about how she had read some sage's books, so she thought that if possible, she could go to the academy to help. It could be seen that although the young family's academy was not large, sixth young master was still very attentive. He even took the initiative to take on the responsibility of being the head of the mountain. Logically speaking, with Yang Qindong's current status, he could have invited a great scholar to take on this position, and it would have been better for the outside world. However, he did not do that, but took on the heavy responsibility, which showed how much importance he attached to it. For this matter, Hu Yan had also mentioned it to Yang Qindong. In this regard, the sixth young master naturally did not care about it. With his wealth, it was naturally not a problem to support the madams, but if they wanted to do something, he would certainly support them. People always had to have something to do. This was not to make a living, but to pass the time. Chapter 297. As a result, Hu Yan became a lecturer in the Yang Academy. Every 7 days, she would give a lecture on etiquette, which was one of her specialties. As the granddaughter of the current Minister of Rites, she had learned a thing or two about etiquette from a young age. Today, there was no class, so the two girls invited each other to the garden to look at the fish. While they were enjoying the view, a white figure dashed into the courtyard. Who else could it be but Madame Shui? Slow down. How can you run so fast like the third madam? Hu Yan chuckled at the sight of Madame Shui rushing over like the wind. Sisters, you're so infuriating. Madame Shui knew that Hu Yan was joking, so she did not take it to heart. Instead, she angrily sat down at the round table and told them what she had seen and heard in the capital today. As one of the famous courtesans in the capital, Madame Shui was gentle and had seen much of the world. She could easily solve some difficult problems if they were placed in front of her. Ever since she became the third madam of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, her reputation and status had skyrocketed. Very few people dared to provoke her. No one knew what could make her so angry. What happened? Why is third younger sister so unhappy? Hu Yan asked curiously. Although Qiao Yin did not say anything, her eyes said the same thing. It's like this. Madame Shui told them roughly what had happened in the capital in a sullen voice. According to her, the streets and alleys of the capital were filled with women being sold, and there were even some old women who were nearly 50 years old selling themselves on the streets. They had hired scholars from some place to write down their specialties, such as how good they were at cooking, how skilled they were at needlework, or how nimble they were at cleaning the house. They did this so that they could sell themselves better. Along the way, the status of women was so miserable. This was the opposite of what her husband had said about men and women being equal and that they could contribute to society as long as they worked hard. As a woman, Madame Shui, who now had a high social status, could not bear to see such a thing happen in front of her. Is that so? Is it caused by the imperial court's conscription? Hu Yan was indeed smart. Although Xiao Yuxue had not said the reason, she had already guessed the reason. On the other hand, Qiao Yin was still puzzled. Even if it's conscription, aren't there military households? They could have gathered people from around the capital, so why did they have to capture people from the capital? This was the capital of the great Ming dynasty, under the feet of the Son of Heaven. With such a mess, aren't you afraid that the imperial censors will impeach you? Aren't you afraid that the people will be upset? Scared? Of course I'm scared. Hu Yan's eyes seemed to spew flames of fury as she said, "It's precisely because we're afraid that we're capturing people from the capital. This is because the soldiers' families are essentially in the capital, which means that the imperial court has something on them. In the future, no one will dare to refuse to do anything they're ordered to do." I see. Understanding the reason, Qiao Yin nodded lightly. But soon after, she said somewhat indignantly, "But threatening someone like this is the conduct of a gentleman. Aren't you afraid that the greater the pressure, the greater the backlash? My husband often says that the one who wins the hearts of the people will win the world. If we continue to do so, we will eventually lose the hearts of the people. Gentlemen? How could there be a gentleman in the court? Otherwise, why wouldn't my husband be willing to go to court and coexist with those officials? Some people always talk about righteousness, benevolence, righteousness, and morality, but they always do things that are beneficial to themselves first. Madame Snow also interjected angrily. Then, she suddenly thought of something and hurriedly looked apologetically at Hu Yan. Big sister, that's not what Yushua meant, it's fine. Hu Yan shook her head with a magnanimous smile. She knew that even her grandfather and father sometimes had to do things and say things that went against their will in the court. This was the result of the environment and could not be changed by a single person. As if Madame Shue's criticism of those officials had implicated first Madame Hu Yan, the atmosphere in the rear garden became rather awkward. Sensing this, Qiao Yin hurriedly interjected, "That's right. Since there are so many women selling themselves, have any of them been sold?" Of course. Now that they were on the topic of business, Madame Shui regained her earlier excitement and continued, "With so many people selling themselves, the price naturally became very low. Some of them were sold. But comparatively speaking, there are still many more who haven't been sold. I discussed it with fourth sister, Madame Xiang, and the immortal abode accepted 50, but it was still a drop in the bucket. On my way back to the manor, I couldn't help but accept 7 more women. I've already brought them to the manor. Please punish me for making such a decision without permission." Madame Shui sincerely expressed her apologies. This wasn't because of his status that she was afraid of. In fact, it was out of respect. "You've done well. There's no need to punish you. In my opinion, the number of people recruited is still too small. It should be more." After Hu Yan heard this, she didn't have the slightest intention of blaming him. On the contrary, she spoke with a supportive attitude. "That's right. Big sister and third sister are right. We should do more good deeds like this. Since we have the ability, we should save one more person. So be it." Even if the young master finds out, he won't blame us. Qiao Yin nodded in agreement. She'd been with Yang Qindong the longest, so she naturally knew what could be done more, and what couldn't be done. Just as she said this, outside the back garden, Hu Yan's personal maid, Shao Qing, hurriedly arrived. She first came to greet the 3 madams one by one, then said, "Seventh sister has returned, and with her, there are 10 girls around 10 years old. Each of them is very delicate and pitiful. Hee, it looks like seventh sister has also shown some kindness. Since that's the case, what are we waiting for? Let's hurry and save them." When Hu Yan heard that even Yang Duo had done this, how could they, who had been idle all this time, endure any longer? She immediately suggested this. "Okay." As the initiator, Madame Shui naturally raised her hands in agreement. However, second Madame Qiao Yin, who was used to listening to Yang Qindong, said hesitantly, "But the young master is still teaching in the academy. Shouldn't we inform him first?" Second sister also said that sixth brother is teaching. "How can we disturb him at will? It's better to do it first. I don't think he will blame us." Hu Yan shook her head. She didn't think it was troublesome. She was worried that Yang Qindong wouldn't allow it. After all, if they did it, they would save a lot of people. In that case, how should they deal with these people? Instead of worrying, it was better to do it first and take it one step at a time. Of course, she was also afraid that Yang Qindong wouldn't allow it. After all, this was a matter of the imperial court. She didn't know if there would be any adverse effects if she went to save people. As the legal wife, Hu Yan said so. The other sisters naturally couldn't say anything more. They ordered someone to get the silver, then went back to their room to change clothes. With the guards, they took the carriage and went straight to the capital. In the Yang Family Academy. Today, Yang Qindong taught everyone a physics experiment. A lot of experimental equipment had been prepared before. This brand new course gave everyone a refreshing feeling. Every student was full of interest, so much so that many people asked him all kinds of questions during lunch. He was so busy until the evening. When it was time to light the lamps, Yang Qindong dragged his slightly tired body back to the manor. As soon as he entered the manor, he saw all women. There were young women who were 3 or 4 years old, and there were even older women who were more than 50 years old. Of course, there were more women between the ages of 10 and 30. At a rough glance, there were at least 500 people, and this was only in the outer courtyard. It was not clear whether there were other places. What's going on? He tilted his head slightly and asked Beta Persei, who was following and protecting him. Beta Persei was tall and powerful, and his attacks were ruthless. Sometimes, even Tiger's mane was on par with him. It was just that his martial arts were extraordinary, and when he spoke, he wasn't very powerful. When he was asked by the 6th young master, he huffed for a long time and couldn't say anything. Call Tiger's mane over. Yang Qindong didn't get an answer from Beta Persei, so he thought of the nimble Tiger's mane. Tiger's mane was called away by the first madam. This time, Beta Persei's answer was straightforward. Oh. Yang Qindong lightly nodded. Tiger's mane was someone by his side, and usually, he didn't listen to him. Usually, even if Hu Yan had something to do, he wouldn't be called. But now that he was being used, it was enough to prove that things must be too busy. Even so, Yang Qindong didn't ask any more questions and went straight to the inner courtyard. He wanted to see for himself what Hu Yan was doing. Also, where did these women come from? What were they going to do? In the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor, Hu Yan took a sip of tea and after slightly quenching her thirst, she continued to speak to Tiger's mane. I'll leave the arrangements for these people to you. When my husband asks, I'll tell him. What are you talking about? Yang Qindong just walked in at this time and immediately asked in a loud voice. Young master. Hearing Yang Qindong's voice from behind, Tiger's mane quickly turned around and bowed respectfully. In response, Yang Qindong waved his sleeves and said, What's the hurry? This. Tiger's mane didn't know how to answer in front of Hu Yan, so he hesitated. However, the first Madam Hu Yan, second Madam Qiao Yin, third Madam Xue, and seventh Madam Yang Duo all stood up at the same time. Hu Yan took the lead to answer, Sixth young master, I'm instructing Tiger's mane to settle the women I bought. Women you bought? Yang Qindong repeated with some confusion. Yes, the situation is like this. In the following time, Hu Yan roughly explained the situation in the capital. In the end, she mentioned that she, several sisters, and seventh Madam Yang Duo couldn't bear it and bought 800 women. Chapter 298. Yang Qindong naturally knew about the chaos caused by the conscription of soldiers in the capital. At that time, he thought that he was shooting himself in the foot. Shi Heng's idea wasn't wrong. Using the able-bodied men of the capital with their families would naturally guarantee their loyalty. It was also because of this that Zhu Qiyu allowed the conscription of soldiers. However, they didn't think that there were pros and cons to this. Didn't they know that a forcefully picked melon wasn't sweet? Wouldn't such a forceful act of breaking up families incur a backlash of anger? Besides, with the great Ming's culture of emphasizing culture and suppressing military force, how much could the salary of the soldiers be? If the able-bodied men joined the army, did they consider how the women and their families would live? If the women lost their livelihood and starved, how could they serve their masters wholeheartedly? How could there not be chaos? This was clearly Shi Heng's short-sightedness, and he would eventually pay the price for it. However, he didn't expect that the women would sell themselves as slaves or maids. He also didn't expect that the madams would suddenly make a move. In just a day, they had bought 800 men. Although this was only a drop in the ocean compared to the 50,000 able-bodied men that he wanted to capture, if his calculations were correct, this was only the beginning and far from the end. He hated Shi Heng's lack of foresight. Rather than thinking about how to increase the loyalty of these soldiers, it would be better to think about how to improve the treatment of these soldiers. As long as the salaries were sufficient, the military households and guard stations around the capital wouldn't be so empty. Speaking of which, this had a lot to do with Yang Qindong's actions. If he hadn't changed history and saved Zhu Qizhen on the battlefield, the great Ming dynasty wouldn't have been divided into two. Even if those soldiers didn't want to do anything, they wouldn't know where to escape to. But now, Yingzong's substitute sect had two places to choose from, giving these military households another choice. The Security Bureau had already sent news that many of the soldiers in the north who had been recorded had gone to the south and sought refuge in Yingzong's land because of the unfair treatment. In that place, they could be re-registered and acquitted, and they would even be treated better. In this way, Shi Heng naturally felt that he had no soldiers to recruit, so he was forced to beat up these able-bodied men of the capital. It was recorded in history that during the Ming dynasty, there were more than 1.5 million troops stationed there, and at the peak of development, there were more than 2 million. From this, it could be seen that the military system was still very complete. This also made it so that the great Ming dynasty did not have to worry too much about military resources. But now, under the rule of one country and two emperors, the military could run around at any time without suffering any punishment, which led to all kinds of unexpected situations. This accident eventually implicated Yang Qindong, who had changed everything. When he looked at the 800 women in the manor, it would be a lie to say that he didn't have a headache. Of course, if these women appeared in Crimson City, there would be no problem in settling them down. Whether it was a garment factory, a paper factory, or a glass factory, they could all be easily arranged. And these people were simply not enough. But in the capital, in the Yang family manor, there were simply too many people. Hu Yan and the others were doing a good deed, so Yang Qindong could not refuse. After all, these were Han people. Even if the madams did not help, Yang Qindong would not leave them in the lurch. Then the problem now was, how should he settle them down? 800 mouths, and this was only the first day. This number might double tomorrow. As for what it would be like in the end, Yang Qindong did not dare to think about it. If these people all relied on him, even if he was rich and overbearing, he would still feel strained eventually. Of course, the most important reason was not to raise idle people, and not to let others develop the habit of eating and being lazy. This was the most important reason. Yang Qindong stood there and thought for a long time. Hu Yan saw that her husband's expression seemed to be a little uncertain, so she asked softly, "Lu Lang, did I do something wrong?" "It doesn't matter, I can save my own expenses." "No." Yang Qindong drew a long arc at the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "How could Yan be wrong? This was originally a good deed. I was just thinking about how to settle them down and give them a way out." Hearing that Yang Qindong did not mean to be angry, Hu Yan's expression immediately became much brighter. "Yes, this is a good deed. Lu Lang doesn't know that if these women were sold to other families, they would probably suffer a lot. As long as they come to us, they will not be bullied. Also, Lu Lang is the best. He will definitely think of a good way to solve this problem." "Yes, Lu Lang will think of a way." Yang Qindong agreed with a smile. But the following night, he had a headache. In the first half of the night, he energetically cleaned up Hu Yan, Qiao Yin, and Madame Shui. Perhaps they thought that it was a mistake to buy 800 women without asking for permission, so they worked extra hard that night. But in front of Yang Qindong, they were still defeated. In the second half of the night, Yang Qindong returned to his study and sat there until daybreak. His body had always been in good condition, especially after coming back to this world. Sometimes, he even wondered if his body had undergone some sort of transformation. Even if he didn't sleep at all, he could still do what he was supposed to do the next day without feeling too tired. In the middle of the night, Yang Qindong finally came up with a few countermeasures. First, he could rely on himself. Give these women a certain amount of money and let them do what they liked, but they would have to pay a certain amount of money to the Yang clan every month. This was the art of teaching people how to fish. Second, he could hire them. He would have them become members of the Yang clan. Then, he would have them work for him, arranging what they could do based on their strengths. After that, he would give them money every month. As for what they could do, for example, he could expand the immortal abode. He could open 2 branches in different parts of the capital. After all, there was only one immortal abode, and it would be inconvenient for people who lived too far away to have a meal. When the time was right, he could even arrange for them to open branches in other cities. This required a lot of manpower, and it was especially suitable for women. In addition, the Yang Clan Bank and the Heavens Beyond Trading Company also required a lot of cleaning, so he could arrange for some people to do the same. Third, he could transfer them to Crimson City. As he said before, Crimson City was growing by the day. It was precisely for this reason that the rapid development of the city had led to a shortage of manpower. The addition of these women would greatly alleviate this problem. Fourth, he could choose a few people to become his students. He could choose a few young and clever ones to enter the Yang Clan Academy to study. As the Yang Clan grew stronger and stronger, it would naturally require more and more professionals. While he still had some free time, he could teach a few more students. Even if he didn't have the time, he could have his students teach him. If he did well, these people would be loyal and useful, and they would be of great help to him in the future. With these 4 methods, it wouldn't be a problem to take care of the livelihoods of several thousand women. The only difference was that it would depend on what choice they would make. With these 4 methods, Yang Qindong spoke of his idea during breakfast the next day. The only difference was that the 3rd method was to arrange for them to work in another city. He even said that he was preparing to expand his business to the south, and those women would be sent to the south as well. Hu Yan and the other women had always trusted Yang Qindong without any reservations. Reality had proven that whenever he did something, he would never make a mistake. Hearing that there was a solution to the problem, they naturally agreed without much consideration. Then, they began to chatter about how they would go to the city to save more women after breakfast. In the capital, because of the matter of conscription, tens of thousands of able-bodied men were captured, and the direct result was that even more women were forced to sell their bodies. Some of them truly didn't know how to live without men. This was naturally a habit formed by the superiority of men over women. The women were busy with the household chores, and without a man, they didn't know what to do. Even the most basic of scheming was difficult for them. There were also some who originally had some ability, and their men had not been captured. They had sacrificed themselves for several years, perhaps even longer, just so that they could sell a few taels of silver so that their husbands could leave the capital with enough money for their travels. But no matter what the reason was, on both sides of the street, there were women selling their bodies. This scene was seen clearly by the officials participating in the morning court session. The soft-hearted sighed, the hard-hearted turned a blind eye, and there were also some righteous people who thought about how to express their views on this matter in the morning court session, to see if they could persuade the emperor not to conscript soldiers in the capital. But no matter what they thought, there weren't many officials who truly wanted to resolve this matter. Firstly, their conditions were limited. Even if they wanted to help, they couldn't help too many people. Secondly, no one wanted to be the first to stand out. Many of their colleagues and officials didn't help. If you acted first, it would show that you were capable. This was the easiest way to make others feel annoyed, and it was very likely that you would be isolated and ostracized. And the more there was no one to help, the more unusual the actions of Hu Yan and the other women were. Yesterday, when these women wanted to save a few more people, they also made some selections, such as good-looking, young, and healthy. But today, they simply pointed at a large group. For example, they recruited all the people on this street, and there were hundreds of them at once. Hu Yan and the others didn't even blink their eyes. In the imperial court, as Zhu Qiyu sat on the dragon throne that showed the dignity of the emperor, a day's court session began. The first to report was naturally the commander-in-chief, Shi Heng, the Marquis of Wuqinghao. He first reported to the emperor about the recent situation of the recruitment, saying that everything was going well. Then, the Minister of War, Yi Ming, stood up, saying that the new recruits had been registered, and there were some good seedlings, healthy, young, and strong soldiers, and so on. He also said that if everything went well, the army could be basically formed in a year or 3 months for the emperor to use. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.